It's good to begin meditation with thoughts of goodwill. The Pali word metta means just that. You wish for happiness. Your true happiness, the true happiness of others. Sometimes you hear it said that metta means that I accept you. But actually it means more like I respect your desire for true happiness, but I also respect the principle of karma, that happiness has to come from skillful actions. So when you're wishing for someone to be happy, you're basically saying, may you understand the causes for true happiness and be willing and able to act on them. You direct that thought to yourself, and you direct it to others, and there's no conflict there. And also no hypocrisy, not pretending to like people that you don't like, but just wish them well. And if they have been behaving in bad ways, you wish for their sake that they change their ways. So start with thoughts of goodwill for yourself. Tell yourself, may I be happy. May I do whatever is needed to create true happiness. And of course, that's not a selfish thought, because whatever is needed to create true happiness includes generosity, virtue, thoughts of goodwill. You may have noticed in the readings when the expression for true happiness may beings not despise one another. They do not wish ill to one another. To that extent, that same thought to other beings. May they understand the causes for true happiness and find true happiness in their hearts. Start with people who are close to your heart. Your family, your very close friends. May they find true happiness. And then extend that thought out in ever-widening circles to people you know well and like. To people you like even though you don't know them so well. To people you're more neutral about. And to people you don't like. Nothing is gained by wishing anyone to suffer. In fact, the Buddha says that ill will for other beings is an expression of a wrong view. So again, you don't have to like people, but you can wish them goodwill. Ajahn Geoff, my teacher in Thailand, had a snake enter his room one time. And years earlier, when he was a younger monk out in the forest, he'd gone to a monastery that was at the foot of a hill, and there was a cave up on the hill. He thought he would go up and spend some time in the cave, maybe spend the night. And what you have in Thailand sometimes are caves with doors. If a monk is going to spend the rains retreat someplace, he has to find a place that has a door. So some caves actually have doors installed so the monks can spend the rains there. And so this cave had a side room with a door. So opened the door and this enormous snake, he said it was big around his thigh. He said to himself, I think I'll spend the time tonight down at the foot of the hill. And then as he was meditating that night, he got a vision saying the Devas had been testing him. So he'd failed that test. So this time when a snake came into his room in his monastery, he said, okay, here's another test. So the snake lived in his room for 3 days. Spread thoughts of goodwill to it. But every time he came into the room, he had a little chest of drawers. The snake would go hide behind the drawers. So after the 3rd day, he figured, okay, I passed the test. So he spread lots and lots and lots of goodwill to the snake. He said, it's not that I have anything against you, it's just that we're a different species and misunderstandings would be easy. So he left the door open and said, there are plenty of places out in the forest where you can be happy. And the snake left. Now, if he tried to show loving kindness to the snake probably would have bitten him. But he did have goodwill. So in this difficult world of ours, we need lots and lots of goodwill. Largely for our own protection, to make sure that we don't do anything unskillful, despite what other people may be doing. You sometimes hear that the sense of an independent self is a bad thing. The Buddha never said that. And here's the case where an independent self is actually good. Your goodness can be independent of the behavior of the people around you. That's when you can depend on yourself. So spread thoughts of goodwill to people you don't even know. And not just people, living beings of all kinds, east, west, north, south, above and below, out to infinity. May we all find true happiness in our hearts. Now bring your attention to the breath. Take a couple of good long, deep in and out breaths. And notice where you feel the breathing process in the body. Wherever it's clearest, wherever you're most sensitive to how the breath feels. Focus your attention there. And when we say breath, we don't mean the movement of the air in and out of the nose. It's more the feeling of the wind element in the body, the energy in the body, the flow of energy that allows the air to come in, allows the air to go out. And that flow of energy can be felt anywhere in the body. Sometimes we talk about watching the breath, which is unfortunate because it gives a sense that you're up here with your eyes looking down into the body, where the breath is down there. Actually, it's best to say, feel the breath. Allow the breath to bathe you. Feel like you're wearing the breath on all sides. But focus your main attention on the areas that are especially sensitive to the breath. And ask yourself, does long breathing feel good? If it does, you can keep it up. If you're not sure, you can try experimenting with other rhythms of breathing. Longer, shorter, faster, slower, heavier, lighter, deeper, more shallow, or in long, out short, in short, out long. Experiment to see what feels best right now. You may try for energizing breathing if you're feeling tired, soothing breathing if you're feeling frazzled. Relaxing breathing if you're feeling tense. You get to decide what feels best. Because an important element in getting the mind into concentration is that you enjoy the topic of concentration. And with the breath, this can mean two things: that you're experiencing a sense of pleasure through the way you breathe, And as I said just now, don't think of yourself watching the breath. Feel like you're being bathed by the breath. You're wearing the breath. And the other is that the breath is interesting. You look at the flow of the breath in the body, and it can flow in lots of different ways. It can flow up, it can flow down. You can have a sense that the breath is coming in from the outside, or that it's originating inside. So see what way of breathing feels good, what way of perceiving the breath feels just right for your body right now. If any thoughts pull you away from the breath, just drop them, and you'll be right back at the breath. You don't have to think of yourself pulling yourself back to the breath. If there are any pains anywhere in the body, don't focus your attention there just yet. Start by focusing on the parts of the body that you can make comfortable by the way you breathe. As the breath gets comfortable, there's sometimes a tendency to focus on the comfort and to forget the breath, in which case you lose the foundation for your concentration. So to counteract that tendency, the next step is to be aware of the whole body as you breathe in, the whole body as you breathe out. And a good way to build up to that whole body awareness is to go through the body first, section by section, to familiarize yourself with how the breathing feels in the different parts of the body. So start down around the navel. Locate that part of the body in your awareness. Watch it for a while as you breathe in, breathe out to see what rhythm of breathing feels good there. And if you sense any tension or tightness in that part of the body, allow it to relax so that no new tension builds up as you breathe in. You're not holding on to any tension as you breathe out. Now move your attention over to the right, to the lower right-hand corner of the abdomen, and follow the same 3 steps there. 1, locate that part of the body in your awareness. 2, watch it for a while as you breathe in, breathe out to see what breathing feels good there. And then 3, if there's any tension or tightness in that part of the body, allow it to relax. If you want, you can think of breath energy entering the body right at that spot, so you don't have to pull it from anywhere else. Now move your attention over to the left, the lower left-hand corner of the abdomen, and follow the same steps there. Now move your attention up to the solar plexus, the area right in front of the stomach and right below the breastbone, and follow the same steps there. And move your attention over to the right side of the rib cage. And then to the left side of the rib cage. Now bring your attention to the middle of the chest. Now bring your attention over to the right, to the spot where the chest and the shoulder meet. And then to the same spot on the left. Now bring your attention to the base of the throat. Now bring your attention to the middle of the head. As you breathe in and out, think of the breath energy going in and out, not only through the nose, but also through the eyes, the ears, the top of the head, the back of the head, deep into the brain. Working through any patterns of tension you may feel on the forehead, the jaws, around the eyes. And dissolving those patterns of tension away. Now bring your attention to the back of the neck. As you breathe in, think of the breath energy entering there from the back, and then going down through the shoulders, the arms, out to the tips of the fingers. And as you breathe out, think of it radiating out from all those parts of the body into the air. Now, a lot of us live in the back of the neck or the back of the skull. This means that wherever you feel that you are in the back of the skull, the back of the neck, the breath has to penetrate right there. You might think of a lens. Sometimes the lens is focused outside. But if you can imagine the lens being focused inside itself, that's the kind of focus you want to get right now. As you get more sensitive to these parts of the body, if you notice that you're holding more tension in one side than the other, allow that side to relax. And see if you can keep it relaxed all the way through the in-breath, all the way through the out. Now keeping your focus in the back of the neck, this time as you breathe in, think of the breath energy entering there and then going down the spine, down to the tailbone. And as you breathe out, think of it radiating out from the entire back into the air. And again, if you feel like you're holding more tension in one side of the back than the other, allow that side to relax. To bring things into balance. Now bring your attention to the base of the spine. As you breathe in, think of the breath energy entering there. And then going down through the hips, the legs, the ankles, feet, toes. And as you breathe out, think of it radiating out from all those parts of the body into the air. Now that completes one cycle in the survey of the body. When you're meditating on your own, you can go through the body as many times as you like, at whatever pace you like. But for right now, choose one spot in the body that seems most congenial to stay focused. Settle your attention there and then think of your awareness spreading out from that spot to fill the whole body. So you're aware of the whole body breathing in, the whole body breathing out. Allow the breath to find whatever rhythm feels best. And again, you can think of the breath energy coming in as you breathe in, or you can think of it radiating out from one spot or two spots in the body. Or you can think of every cell in the body radiating breath energy out as you breathe in. Whichever perception is most conducive to getting the mind to settle down. Sometimes I found having two spots is especially good. It's like you have two hands. You're holding something in both hands. You can't pick up anything else. So for instance, you might think of one spot being in the middle of the head and the other spot being down at the tailbone, and a line connecting them. Or wherever you went. What's important is you try to maintain this sense of centered but broad awareness. It's healing for the body, and it's healing for the mind. Because it's still, but all around. It provides a good foundation for insights to arise. But for the time being, don't worry about the insights. Just make sure this foundation is strong. have a half hour of walking meditation. As you get up from your seat, find a place to walk. Try to maintain this sense of being fully aware of the body, breathing in, breathing out. You can choose any one spot in the body to center your awareness. I recommend a spot that doesn't move too much as you walk. Try to maintain that center. Think of a bowl of oil. It's filled to the brim, and you don't want to spill a drop. If you're walking outside, don't let anybody know you're doing walking meditation, especially if you're crossing the street. In other words, walk at a normal pace. Because the whole point of this is learning how to maintain your center in normal, everyday activities. Sometimes you hear that meditation practice and concentration practice are two different things. But you didn't hear it from the Buddha. As he said, the themes of concentration are the four establishings of mindfulness. And it's in the fourth jhana, the fourth level of right concentration, that mindfulness is purified. When you look at the descriptions of right mindfulness and right concentration, you might say that right mindfulness is the recipe, and the descriptions of right concentration are the restaurant reviews. In other words, this is when you do mindfulness the proper way, this is what you get as a result. Here it's important to remember that mindfulness means not just being aware of things. It means keeping something in mind. In this case, you're keeping the breath in mind. And the more consistently you can do that, the more you get into concentration. Now, to do that consistently, it's not just thinking about the breath or remembering the breath. It involves mindfulness and alertness. Alertness is knowing what you're doing while you're doing it. Sometimes you hear the word sampajanya, which I'm translating as alertness, translated as clear comprehension. That comes from the commentaries. And it's interesting, as the commentaries discuss the meaning of sampajanya, they take up the question, does it mean being aware of what you're doing while you're doing it? And they get very snide. So even jackals know what they're doing when they're howling. Babies know what they're doing when they're sucking at their mother's breast. But it's not the case. Do they really know what they're doing? Oftentimes our minds are someplace else. You can tell when the commentaries get snide, they're actually wrong. Years back when I did the Buddhist monastic code, I was getting feedback. And I noticed that when people were snide in their comments, their arguments were actually pretty weak. Whereas when they were matter of fact, their arguments were much stronger. So in this case, you look at what the canon had to say about sampajanya. And it's when you're walking, you know you're walking. When you're sitting, you know you're sitting. When a perception or a feeling comes in the mind, you know that that perception, that feeling is present in the mind. You know what you're doing while you're doing it. That's the second quality, mindfulness, alertness. And then the third one is ardency, which is the desire to do this well. So when you're with the breath and you suddenly find yourself off the breath, you come right back. While you're with the breath, you make the effort to be as sensitive as possible to how the breathing feels. And then you adjust it so that it feels good. And this way you give rise to the different factors of jhana, sense of pleasure, sense of fullness. So these two practices go together. The whole point of right mindfulness is to get the mind to settle down. And then it can see things clearly. The more still the mind is, the more absorbed you are in the breath. The more you begin to notice subtle things that you wouldn't have noticed otherwise. There are schools of thought that say absorption is not necessary. The Buddha says, say when you get the mind into the first jhana, you're focused on the body in and of itself, ardent, alert, mindful, putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world. Then you go to the second jhana, he says you're focused on the body, but you don't think any thoughts about the body. In other words, you're fully present to the sensation of the body sitting here. You don't have to adjust anything anymore. Everything is well coordinated throughout the body. The body's all breathing in together, breathing out together. And you're certainly not thinking thoughts about anything else. So you are aiming at a state where you don't have to think about things. There'll still be the perception, the mental note that says breath, breath, breath. But that's all you'll need. Okay, when you get the mind still like that, then when something does come up on a more subtle level, you'll see it. Which is why the stillness really is an important part of the meditation. So when you find that the mind cannot settle down like this, you don't just say, well, I'll accept the fact that the mind is not settling down. I've learned a lesson about things being not self. That aborts the path. You have to figure out what's going wrong. Is it with the breath? You try changing the breath, see what happens. Is it with the mind? Are there any leftover moods or attitudes from the day that are getting in the way? This is where you may want to shift away from the breath to what are called the guardian meditations. To deal with, say, grief, lust, anger, jealousy, whatever the emotion is that comes in from the day. You think about the Buddha, what's called recollection of the Buddha. Think about what an amazing person he was. To have found this path and then to teach it to everybody for free. And to establish the Dharma and the Vinaya in such a way that there's a community to carry it on. It's lasted all these many, many years. Thinking about how fortunate we are that the teachings are still alive. Or you can think about goodwill. If you're angry at somebody, you remind yourself, okay, anger can lead eventually to ill will, and that's not a good thing. And as I said earlier, goodwill means basically, may these people understand the causes for true happiness. In other words, learn to be more skillful. And that changes your relationship. At the very least, it protects you from doing and thinking things that would be harmful to yourself in the long run. And it gets you away from thoughts of revenge, even thoughts of justified anger. You think about the unattractiveness of the body, if lust is a problem, or pride about your body is a problem. Think about all the different parts. Put them on the floor here in front of you. And ask yourself, which part are you proud of? Which part are you lusting after? Why is it then that when they're all sewed up together that you can't feel those emotions? Simply not worth it. Or you think about death. Death is a good counteractant. For times when you're feeling lazy, you say, what if I died right now? In the midst of some unskillful thinking. Am I ready to go? Well, no. Then why? What are you still holding on to? There's work that needs to be done. So these are just a few examples of how you can use other meditation topics to get the mind in the proper mood. Clear up the problems in the mind. When you've got the breath cleared up, you've got the mind cleared up. And it's more likely that they'll be willing to settle down together. So as we'll see in this afternoon's discussion, the cause of suffering is not wanting things to change. It's wanting things to change in a way that they can't. We have lots of potentials here in the present moment. You could sit here and make yourself thoroughly miserable for the rest of the meditation session. Or you could make yourself still, relaxed, centered. These potentials are here. Years back, I was leading a group at what we call our outdoor classroom at the monastery. And one woman had brought a friend who had never meditated before. It was a lovely afternoon, not too hot, not too cold. Gentle breeze coming in off the chaparral. A very pleasant meditation time. And when we came out from the meditation, the woman who was new to meditation said, "I have never suffered so much in my life." So there is that potential here. But there are lots of other good potentials. So you try to find the good potentials and you encourage them. And that's part of the path. There may be some stress in knowing that you haven't gotten to where I want yet, and there's going to be work involved. But that's not a thought to be abandoned. The cause of suffering is to be abandoned. The desire to actually want to succeed at the path is part of the path. That's to be developed. So it's simply a question of learning, well, what works? How does causality work, and how do the causes right here, right now, in my body and mind work? So I can get things to settle down. That desire is to be encouraged. You may have been struck by the first passage in the readings, if you had a chance to look at the readings. It says, all things are rooted in desire. The word for things there, Dhamma, can mean any kind of phenomenon, anything you would know. The one thing that is not rooted in desire is nirvana. But everything else, good, bad, indifferent, comes out of desire. It's good to think about what that means. Think about the nature of desire. It doesn't just sit there. It senses that something is unsatisfactory. Either you're in a situation you don't like, or you're in a situation that you do like and you're afraid that it might change. And you imagine something better. And you aim to act toward that. So there's kind of an arrow, an act of imagination, and an arrow. This is in all of our experience. The nature of the present moment is such that it is fabricated for the sake of something. There's a passage where the Buddha talks about the different aggregates and points out that sankhara, fabrication, shapes the potential for, say, a sense of your body, a feeling, perception, thought construct, or act of consciousness. It takes that potential and it shapes it into something actual for the sake of something. Usually it's for the sake of pleasure, which means that the present moment is not stable. It has a built-in gap between the actual raw materials that are coming from your past karma, these potentials, and your desired aim. And there's a movement to cross that gap, which is why the goal cannot be the present moment, because the present moment is, you might call it a construction site. It's always under construction. To get to that goal that is beyond the present moment requires more desire that is then satisfied in the attainment. Think about the Buddha's quest. It started with a desire. He saw that he was subject to aging, illness, and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, distress, and despair, subject to defilement. And he imagined something that was totally free of those things. And he wanted to go there. That's quite an undaunted imagination and an undaunted desire. But that's the desire that got him going and finally led to his attainment. Now you can compare this to what he says later on when he describes the truth of suffering. One of the aspects of that truth of suffering is not getting what is wanted. And sometimes we hear that and we think, well, it must mean if you don't want anything, then you'll be okay. But his meaning is much more specific. It basically comes down to not wanting to have to be subject to aging, illness, and death, and sorrow. But realizing that you can't get there just by wishing it. There's work that has to be done. Now if you just stay there wishing, there's going to be suffering. But if you actually use an understanding of how that reality, how that goal may be brought about, then you can actually put an end to suffering. So it's not a case of learning not to want. It's more learning how to focus your desires in the right place, in the right direction. In other words, doing the causes that will get you where you want to go. As I said this morning, the desire for awakening, the desire for the unborn and the undying is something to be encouraged, which means it's not part of the second noble truth, which is which has to be abandoned. It's part of the fourth noble truth. It's part of the path. It has to be developed. Why the path works, that the Buddha found, is based on what he learned about causality. When you see the very short descriptions that he gives of his awakening, it comes down to that, this principle of what's called this, that conditionality. When there is this, there is that. When this arises, that arises. When this passes away, that passes away. From the arising of this comes the arising of that. From the passing away of this comes the passing away of that. Those are two causal principles. One is the cause arises and the effect arises immediately. The cause goes away, the effect goes away immediately. As I said, it's like putting your finger in a fire. It starts burning right away. You pull it out, it stops burning right away. You don't have to wait for the next lifetime for it to stop burning. Then there are other causes and effects, though, that can take place over a long time, very long periods of time. The Buddha talked about one time how people who have a very short memory of previous lifetimes, and he said a short memory is 40 aeons. Now the life of one universe is an aeon. And how many billions of years has our universe been around? It's not even an aeon yet. You can imagine for 40 aeons, and that's considered a short memory. Because sometimes karma can take a long time to work itself out. However, the fact that you do have these choices in the present moment, where you are shaping the results that are coming in from the past. And it turns out that you have freedom of choice in how you shape them. Those choices do not have to be determined by the past. All too often they are. But we can learn how to develop new skills. We can learn how to develop new approaches. So we actually become more and more skillful in how we shape the present moment. It's like being a good cook. When a good cook can take bad ingredients and make something good out of them. A bad cook can take good ingredients and make something pretty miserable. So what you can do is you can learn new skills in how you're putting together your present moment. This is where choices are important. And when you know this principle, it's what allows for your desires to be skillful, especially your desire for the deathless. You realize that you can make the proper use of the principle of causality for the sake of a true harmless happiness. Now the path there is something that has to be done. It's created through causes. There must be desire in the doing. You have to want to do it. One of the readings was, you might remember, the Brahmin who visits Ananda and asks him, what is this goal that you're aiming for in your practice? And Ananda says, yeah, one of the aspects of the goal is the end of desire. Well, how do you get there? And then Ananda describes the four bases for success: concentration based on desire, based on persistence, based on intent, and based on your powers of analysis. And the Brahmin says, well, in that case, it's an endless path. I can put an end to desire by using desire. And Ananda says, well, you came here to this park where we are right now, right? Before you came, did you have a desire to come here? Yes. Now that you're here, where's that desire? Well, it's gone. And that's the same way the path works. You act on this desire to attain the goal. And then when you attain the goal, then you don't need that desire anymore. You look in the Buddha's descriptions of the path, and there are two factors where the role of desire is explicit. One is right resolve, which is the resolve on renunciation, resolve on non-ill will, and resolve on harmlessness, resolve on no static. And these are the ways in which you make up your mind, okay, I want to learn how to overcome my attachment to sensuality. I want to learn to overcome whatever ill will I have. I want to learn how to overcome whatever tendencies I have to harm either myself or other people. So you make up your mind, it's making up your mind that you want to attain, act in a certain way. And then of course there's right effort, which starts with generating desire, activating your intent, generating desire, fostering persistence, upholding your intent to make sure that unskillful qualities do not arise. If they have arisen, you want to make sure that they get abandoned. You want to develop skillful qualities, and you want to abandon them, and you want to once they're there, then you want to develop them further until they reach the consummate level. And what you're going to find as you work on the path is that you've got some desires that are, say, going to pull you away. In the morning when you want to get up and meditate, the part of you says, I'd rather just sleep. Or when you want to be generous, you want to observe the precepts, and something inside you says, no, I have some other priorities here. You have to have the desire to practice the path as an overriding desire that will counteract those other ones. It's not the case that it's going to be a process of reason versus desire. Every desire has its reasons, because we have many, many desires. And in the throng and in the discussions of what to follow through, which desires to follow through with and which ones not to, they come up with their reasons. So what you have to have is determinations that are based on a wise view of what needs to be done, and with enough power to overcome your alternative desires. What's interesting though, given that the Buddha's own path was a very determined path, he mentions the topic of determination only once in the suttas. And that's in a sutta where, I don't know if you know the story, there's a young man who had lots of faith in the Buddha. And so he goes forth, dedicating himself to the Buddha. He's never met the Buddha. And one night he's staying in a potter's shed, and the Buddha comes and asks the potter if he can stay in the shed too. And the potter says, well, there's already a mendicant in the shed. If he lets you stay, you can stay. So the Buddha goes in, asks the young man if he can stay, and the young man says, sure, friend, you can stay. And so then the Buddha sits down, and they meditate late into the night, and the Buddha says, this young man is very inspiring. What if I ask him about his teacher? So he asks, who is your teacher? And the young man says, the Buddha. And he says, do you know where the Buddha is? And he's up in Savatthi someplace. If you met him, would you know him? No. Can I teach you? Sure, if you want to. Go ahead. So the Buddha teaches him, and when he starts out with this, what he calls these 4 determinations. Well, let's finish the story first before we go into them. In the course of describing the first determination, which is discernment, the young man is following what the Buddha has to say and becomes a non-returner. And he says, whoops, I called the Buddha friend. So at the end of the talk, he apologizes for having called the Buddha friend. The Buddha accepts his apology. And then the young man wants to ordain, and the Buddha says, are your robes and bowl complete? And the young man says, no. So the Buddha says, well, go out and find some robes and a bowl. So he does, and as he goes out, he gets killed by a cow. Cows in India apparently can be pretty vicious. There are a lot of cases of people being killed by cows. And so the monks bring the news to the Buddha, and the Buddha says this young man was wise. He didn't pester me with a lot of questions about the Dharma. He's now reborn in the pure abodes. And there are the 4 determinations. They are discernment, truth, relinquishment, and calm. Now there are things to which you aim. In other words, you aim at developing discernment. You aim at developing truth. You aim at developing the ability to relinquish. And you aim at calm. The word calm here, upasama, can also mean to still the mind or to find stillness. And in attaining Nibbana, you attain the highest form of these. Nibbana depends on having the highest discernment, which is the discernment that lets go of greed, aversion, and delusion. It itself is the highest noble truth. Getting there requires the ultimate in relinquishment, and also the Nibbana itself is the highest calm, the highest stilling. But these are also qualities that we develop on the path. And here the Buddha associates them with particular verbs. He says, don't neglect discernment, guard the truth, be committed to relinquishment, and train only for calm. Now you see these desires go against other kinds of desires that are ignorant, deceptive, grasping, and agitated. So there's going to be a struggle, because these other desires have taken control of the mind for long periods of time, which is one of the reasons why when the Buddha uses analogies for the path, or metaphors for the path, they tend to be military. Warriors going into battle, building a fortress on the edge of a frontier and having to be careful about the enemy. He also uses metaphors for developing skills, like how a carpenter develops skills, how a cook learns how to please his master. And also quests, people looking for something and how they go about finding it. One of the most important images the Buddha gives is the man who's searching for hardwood. In other words, the hard part of a tree. And he has to learn how not to satisfy himself with the twigs and the branches and the bark and the softwood. So there's a fair amount of effort in these images. There's no image where the Buddha says you just sail across on a nibbana yacht from this side of the stream to the other, or you don't relax your way into awakening. It's going to be a struggle, because these desires of four determinations go against the habits of the world. One is going for the habit of wanting to go for quick results without thought of the long-term consequences. This is also would include wanting to be told that you're already awakened, you don't have to do anything, just sit there in your awakened awareness. Second one is the habit of using deceit when you can't get what you want through honest means, or when you've done something bad, you want to cover it up so nobody knows. The discernment on relinquishment goes against our habit of accumulating as much as we can. And the determination on calm goes against our habit of looking for happiness in variety, excitement, and change for the sake of change. So there will be struggle in the path. It's going to involve a fair amount of effort, and it's going to involve a fair amount of stress. Think about that desire for awakening, even when it's properly the desire for the unborn and the undying. Even when it's properly focused, there's what the Buddha calls renunciate distress, when you realize there are people who have attained that, I haven't attained it yet. But that kind of distress is something he actually encourages as part of the path. It helps as your motivation. Years back, some people came to talk to Ajahn Geoff, and they said they noticed this path that we're following is aimed at peace, right? Yes. Well, look at some of the monks, and it looks like they're really straining when they meditate. And he gave the analogy. He says, when you're hungry, you have to go through all the effort of eating, finding the food, cooking the food, chewing on the food, swallowing it, etc. So the effort that goes in the path. But when you get to your result, of course, which is a sense of fullness, then you can relax. So let's look a little bit more in detail on these four determinations. Discernment, as the Buddha said, begins with the question, what when I do it will lead to my long-term welfare and happiness? What when I do it will lead to my long-term harm and suffering? So the wisdom in that lies in the fact that one, you know that happiness is going to have to depend on your actions. Two, long-term is possible. It's not just waves coming off the shore and disappearing right away. There is a long-term happiness. And three, long-term is better than short-term. There's that passage in the Dhammapada. The wise person sees if there is a greater happiness to be gained by letting go of a lesser happiness, the wise person will be willing to let go of the lesser happiness for the sake of the greater happiness. And there was a British translator of the Dhammapada who translated that verse, and in a footnote he said, this can't possibly be the meaning of this statement. I mean, it's just too obvious. We don't need a Buddha to tell us. Well, we may not need a Buddha to tell us, but we certainly need somebody to remind us. I have a friend who's an author, and she also teaches at university. I guess she's probably retired by now. But whenever she published a new book, she would be invited around to the alumni clubs to read passages from her books. So she would have to choose an incident that was self-contained, that would make sense in a 15-minute reading. And in one of her novels, there's a scene where this woman has just learned that her father, after the death of their mother, and their father has a wife, a courtesan. This is set in China, 18th century. And she's just appalled that her father has done this. But the courtesan is a really good woman. She tries to be a good mother to their daughter. And so one evening they're playing chess, and as they're talking, as they play chess, the mother says, if you really want to be happy in life, you have to decide there's one thing you want more than anything else. You have to be willing to give up everything else for the sake of that one thing. And the daughter, like daughters are, they just half listening, half not listening. But she began to notice that her stepmother was a really sloppy chess player, losing pieces all over the board. So she starts getting more aggressive. Of course, what happens, is the stepmother's laid a trap. Quick checkmate. And of course, but the way she played chess was illustrating the principle she was trying to teach, which is you have to be, if you're going to win at chess, you have to be willing to sacrifice your pieces. My friend read this to a couple of alumni clubs, and she realized she had to change and find another passage in the novel. Nobody wanted to hear the message. We wanted to win at chess and keep all our pieces. So discernment is when you realize, okay, there are things you've got to give up. Just as an aside, back when I was a young monk, I was taking what they call the Naktam exams. There's a series of exams on the Dhamma and the Vinaya that they give to young monks. And part of the exams is that they will give you a book of quotes from the Buddha, quotes from the canon, and you have to memorize a lot of those quotes. And then they will give you a topic on which they want you to write a little Dharma talk. And in the course of writing that little Dharma talk, in the first year you have to bring in one quote, second year you have to bring in 2 quotes, the third year you have to bring in 3. And as I was studying for the exams, I'd hear these little novices just memorizing page after page after page of these things. And of course it was in Thai, not my language, and I was not much of a memorizer. So I figured what I would have to do is just get 1 or 2 quotes that I could use in any situation, no matter what the topic. And sure enough, this is one of them. If there is a greater happiness to be found by letting go of a lesser one, you're willing to let go of the lesser one. I use that every year. Pass the exams. One thing you'll notice in that question that lies at the basis of discernment is what, when I do it, will lead to my long-term welfare and happiness. You do have a sense of I who is going to be doing the path for the sake of your happiness. We'll talk more about this tomorrow. But I just want to underline that because sometimes you hear it said that if you have a sense that you are doing the path, that is wrong view right there. It's going to corrupt the whole path. Well, apparently nobody told the Buddha about that. Because the canon is full of statements about what, when I do it, or I will do this as part of the path. You're taking responsibility for your actions from the very beginning all the way up to the very end. So that's the important part of discernment. You take responsibility for your happiness, and you're going to look for long term. And what it means is you're trying to figure out what is a worthwhile goal, and then how do I get there effectively. That's the role of discernment as a determination. Then truth, basically you commit yourself to doing what you see is the right path. And then you reflect on the results. There's a passage where the Buddha says, this is how the Dharma is nourished, through committing yourself to doing it, and then reflecting on your results and making adjustments based on how well the results are going. It requires those 3 qualities I talked about this morning that are involved in mindfulness practice. That you are ardent, alert, and mindful in doing what you're doing. You're alert to seeing the results. You're mindful as to what you should be doing. You're alert to seeing what results you're actually getting. And then you're ardent in trying to do it well. If you see you've made a mistake or see that something's not working, the question is what to change. So you're basically working on the desire to change things. Again, here we're told that craving, the cause of suffering is the desire to change things, or the desire for things to be different from what they are. The Buddha wasn't that sloppy. He said there are specific desires that are unskillful, specific desires that are not. The ones that are rank as the cause of suffering are craving for sensuality, craving for becoming, craving for non-becoming. Craving for sensuality is your fascination with your sensual fantasies, your sensual plans, about what kind of pleasures you'd like, what kind of ice cream you'd like today after you go home from this retreat, whatever. And you sit there and think about all the various flavors they have here in Portlandia. I sent a message to one of my students that I was coming to Portland, and he says, well, welcome to the hipster capital of the world. So I'm sure there's lots of foods you can think about. Then there's the craving for becoming, which is wanting to take on an identity in a world of experience. And this can happen on a micro level inside your mind. It also happens in the macro level when you die. And the macro level comes from the micro level. In other words, your mind's tendency to picture something that you want, and it's surrounded by an environment in which that, whatever that is, exists. And then you go in. You can think in these ways. When you go into a dream world at night, this is what happens. So an image appears, and you go into the image. And you can imagine when you're dying, how easily that can happen. You can't stay in this body. Something appears, and if you don't have your wits about you, you just jump. And we can create a lot of suffering that way. There was a film I happened to see when I was flying across the Pacific one time. There was this kid who had the Ice Age series sitting right in front of me. And I must admit it was pretty clever. But there was one scene, I think it was Ice Age 2. The characters are adrift in this fog bank. And all of a sudden these lights appear, and they go towards the lights. And there are these mermaids and mermen, and they're really, really attractive. And the characters are just kind of dreamy-eyed, looking at these mermaids and mermen. And then you begin to realize, when you look carefully at the mermaids and mermen, they're static. You look in the static, and they're fish with fangs. So when you die, be careful. Be careful where you go. Look at the fine print. And then there's the craving for non-becoming, which is the craving to be annihilated. You can imagine at the end of one life, it's been a miserable life. You're suffering a lot of pain, and all you can think is, I'd like to be obliterated. That, too, is a form of creates a lot of suffering, because you cannot obliterate yourself. You can obliterate yourself for a while. You can go into states of what they call states of non-perception, where you totally blank out. But then you come out of those. It's a temporary thing. And then you're left over with the bad karma of having just wanted to obliterate yourself. So those three things, those three desires are the cause for suffering. And as I said earlier, the desire to stick with the path and get on the path and stick with it. Okay, that's actually something to be encouraged. As I said last night, a lot of us want to be told that we don't have to, by not desiring anything, we will get to where we want to go, we'll find awakening. And that's Barney the dinosaur in reverse. Barney the dinosaur says, if you want something strongly enough, you'll get it. The reverse version is, if you don't want something strongly enough, you'll get it. That's how it works. The Buddha gives the image of trying to get milk from a cow. If you twist the horn, you're not going to get the milk. You have to pull in the udder. Now, there are a lot of people who spend a lot of time twisting the horn, and then they stop. They realize, okay, stop not twisting the horn is much better than twisting the horn. And they stop there. And it is relaxing, it is easeful, but you don't get milk. You're not satisfied. And you may sit there and say, this cow awareness here I've got is really wonderful, but it's not as good as getting the milk. So in this process of being true to your discernment, you will also develop what the Buddha calls the 4 Iddhibhatas, a basis for success, which are concentration based on desire, concentration based on persistence, concentration based on intent, and concentration based on your powers of analysis. In all those cases, especially with the desire, he says you have to balance your desire so it's not too strong and not too weak. But as I said earlier, an important aspect of that also is focusing your desire on the causes. When you take care of the causes, the results will have to come. As I said earlier, desire includes imagination. And I was reading an article a while back about what the analysis they've done of how people who are good at imagining things, and they were able to create a picture in their mind, hold it in mind, examine it, and then make changes and look at what the results from the changes are going to be. They can do this all in their heads. And these are basically related to the 4 bases for success. The ability to give rise to the image would be desire. Persistence is the ability to maintain the image. Intent is the ability to investigate and examine the image. And using your powers of analysis, which would include your powers of ingenuity, would be the last base for success. The Pali word vimamsa has a lot of different ways of translating it, and one of them is ingenuity. So you're not just following instructions. You look at the Buddha's instructions on, say, breath meditation, they're just 16 steps, and they actually raise more questions than they answer. And you've got to figure out how to answer those questions yourself. So there's an element of your own imagination and your own ability, willingness to experiment. In fact, there's all aspects of the path require imagination. If you're going to practice generosity, you have to imagine, well, what would be a good gift in this situation? What do I have that I can give, and what would be worth giving? To whom should I give it? One of the residents at the monastery is going through a bad period right now. And I said, look, you've got to learn how to be more generous with other people. She said, well, what do you want me to do? I said, it's up to you to figure out what would be good ways of being generous, that you have to learn how to exercise your imagination. The same with following the precepts. There are going to be situations in which you are asked to give some information and you don't want to give it to the person for fear that they're going to abuse the information. And you have to use your imagination to figure out, how do I not give this information without lying? And I'll leave that for you for homework. I'll give you two examples. One example comes from Massachusetts, the other example comes from California. And I'll ask you to decide which is which. In one of the examples, the question is, what about tax returns? Do we have to tell the truth on tax returns? If we don't want to support the war. Okay. The second one was, your friend has an ugly dress and she asks, how do I look? How would you answer without lying? In concentration, you have to learn how to use your imagination in working with the breath. Figure out what topics of concentration will be good for you, which concentration will be satisfying and interesting to you. And especially in discernment, requires a lot of imagination. If you've ever read the book Straight from the Heart by Ajahn Geoff, he talks about his times when he was sitting long hours at night and getting into a lot of pain. And he started asking questions about the pain, the questions I would never have thought to ask, like, what is the shape of the pain? What intention does the pain have? Is the pain the same thing as the part of the body where it seems to be? And he said, if you start asking these questions, you start getting interested in the pain instead of trying to run away from it. It changes the balance of power inside the mind. You're suddenly now pursuing the pain, and you find the pain starts to run away from you. But one of the questions is, can I follow where is the sharpest point of the pain right now? You try to follow it, and you find it moves all over the place. It's not the static thing that you might have thought it was. So all aspects of the path require using your imagination, which of course is an important part of desire, and being true to your discernment. And then finally, third is relinquishment. And here's the Buddha's not saying it's just not just letting go, but also seeing what good benefits you get from letting go. Giving or relinquishment is always a trade. It's not a deprivation. So by letting go of the pleasures of sensuality, you find that the mind finds it easier and easier to get into the pleasures of concentration. However, letting go requires more than just telling yourself to let go. You have to see the allure of what it is that you've got to let go. Say that you have a problem with being angry. You tell yourself, I really hate this tendency I have to be angry. You have to admit to yourself that there's somebody in your mind who likes to be angry, that finds some satisfaction, some sense of power, some sense of whatever that comes from being angry. And until you can see the allure of the anger, you're not going to be able to get past it. You can think about the drawbacks as much as you want. But if you don't understand why you actually go for it, then seeing those drawbacks will not have much of an effect. The Buddha talks about two kinds of causes for suffering. One is kind of cause when you simply look at it, it goes away. And just use equanimity, and it just seems to wither away in the face of your gaze. And it's because of that kind of cause of suffering that there are a lot of meditation methods that say basically, well, just look at whatever comes up, note it, and it's going to go away on its own. However, there are causes of suffering that will not go away that way. If you stare at them, they stare right back. Or else they go underground and they come up someplace else. In a case like that, you have to do what the Buddha calls exerting a fabrication. And the fabrications there would be the fabrications you see in dependent core rising, which are bodily fabrication, the breath, verbal fabrication, the way that you talk to yourself. The Buddhist technical terms are directed thought and evaluation. And then finally, mental fabrication, which is perceptions and feelings. So if a particular desire comes up that is unskillful, you have to ask yourself, well, how am I breathing around this issue? You notice this especially when you're angry or fearful. Secondly, how am I talking to myself about this? Can I talk to myself about it in different ways? What am I focusing on? What am I saying about it? How can I change that? And then finally, what are the feelings and perceptions I have around this? Can I change the perceptions? Can I change the mental images I have? Here's where it's useful. We'll be talking later about developing goodwill. If you feel oppressed by a particular situation, you have to remind yourself, I can make my goodwill bigger than this situation. There's the image of your goodwill as being like the earth, your goodwill being like the river Ganges, your goodwill being like space. People can try to write on space, but the words don't stick. If you can hold that image in mind, you find that you can put up with an awful lot of things you wouldn't be able to put up otherwise. So in these ways that you use this process we have of fabricating the present moment, and you learn how to do it more skillfully to get past these causes of suffering. Finally, calm. Calm here doesn't mean just sort of sitting or whatever. It's the calm that goes with doing the path. It means, one, you have a sense of confidence that you're doing the right thing. We had that question last night. This business about thinking about the long-term consequences of your actions, doesn't that make you nervous? And the answer, of course, is, well, if you have confidence in what you're doing, no, it doesn't make you nervous at all. If you have confidence in what the Buddha taught, that you will find happiness by being generous, virtuous, and meditating. You do that. And even though it may take a while for the results to come, you have confidence they've got to come. So you don't just sit passively waiting, you maintain your calm and your good humor while you keep striving. Back in the 19th century, there's a story about an Englishman who wanted to go and check out some parts of the Northwest Territories. And the only people he knew that he could find that were going to go through that countryside were a bunch of Dene Native Canadians. And so he went with them. It's the first case, the recorded case of an Englishman trusting his life to a band of Indians. And he noticed that as they were going across the countryside on the days when they didn't do well with the hunting, those were the days when they joked the most. In other words, you do what you can to keep your spirits up as you're dealing with a difficult situation. And that's what keeps you calm. And it allows you to keep on striving. So basically you're learning how to take things in stride. However, this equanimity is not the goal after it is fabricated, but it's an important means to the goal. And ultimately, you're aiming at a calm that goes greater than concentration, greater than equanimity, which is the calm that comes when the mind is totally released from suffering. So those are the four determinations. Being determined on discernment, not neglecting discernment, guarding the truth, being committed to relinquishment, and training only for calm. And these are the desires that you want to have as overriding desires in your practice. So when issues come up that would pull you in other directions, you say, no, these are the principles I want to hold by. I want to make sure that I'm looking at the long-term consequences. I want to make sure that I'm true to that determination. I'm willing to give up whatever has to be given up and learn how to do this with an attitude of confident calm. And it's in this way that you develop skillful desires that help you stay on the path. So I think I'd stop there right now and ask if there are any questions. We have a traveling mic.
We have a traveling person.
There's a question over here.
Are the four determinations themselves right resolve?
They're not listed in right resolve, but they're forming the resolve, yeah. And they're basically the things that you resolve on in order to get beyond sensuality, in order to get beyond becoming, in order to get beyond your desire for non or harmfulness. Yeah. Well, I was going to talk later on this afternoon about applying these four determinations to mind, metta or goodwill, which would be the second of the right resolves. As the Buddha said, it's not the Buddha. Again, nobody ever told the Buddha that we have universal goodwill as an innate quality of the mind. He taught that it was something. It's something that you have to practice as a form of mindfulness, and you have to be determined on it, because it's so easy to forget.
Thank you. I have a question about anger, which you were just speaking about, the allure of anger. And when I investigate for myself, what in me goes for it, as you say, my mind goes for it. It's hard for me to see an allure. What I see is something like wanting to get out of some other feeling, wanting to get out of fear or terror. And so there's this kind of quick fix of taking the drug of anger. It takes away the, sometimes paralyzing feeling of fear that's underneath. And I have heard some people say it's almost a cliche, oh, behind anger is fear. But would you advise me to look for the allure of the fear, or study more the allure of escaping the fear?
There's the fear, and then the fear itself doesn't have any allure. But then there's a question: you're afraid of losing something. The question: what are you afraid of losing? That's where you want to look for the allure.
Oh.
So you have to go back another step.
Okay.
Although sometimes it's just the sense of when you're angry, there's a sense of power. That I'm not stuck here, I can get out of here. This is one quick way of getting out. So
but it doesn't do that, though.
No, it doesn't.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. It never does. I mean, and as many times as I learn that, it never gets me out of the fear or the situation or anything about it. It only makes it worse.
Okay, in that case, you ask yourself, okay, what is it I'm afraid of losing? And that thing that I'm afraid of losing, what's the allure of that? What am I clinging to? Which is causing the fear, which is then the anger.
So are you suggesting that, I'm sorry, I'm taking a lot of follow-up.
That's fine. We've got plenty of time. We've got to fill up another 45 minutes.
Well, I'm just getting started. No, I'm just kidding. So when I look for the allure of this thing that I'm afraid of losing, which sometimes it takes different forms, it's usually some form of security or belonging. The allure of that appears to be a pretty root kind of human need. It just happens that in my case, maybe it runs a little deeper or maybe more sensitive than maybe a more well-adjusted, more mature person. So there is this extreme reactivity that happens. And as many times as I try to learn to interrupt it, I seem to keep forgetting.
Well, there's a sense of urgency that you've got. So I got to do something right away. And anger is about one of the quickest ways of doing something. May not be the wisest thing to do. Because sometimes it has to, when you're angry about a situation or you feel that something really important is being threatened, you have to really sit down and think it through. What would be the best thing to solve this problem, rather than just getting angry? And recognize there is a problem. We're not denying that there are problems. And sometimes you have to think strategically.
Thank you. It seems like I know that intellectually.
You just have to sit down
So
and do
just
it.
practice more.
Just practice. Well, practice. I'd say thinking up some situations that you tend to get angry at, and what would have been a better way of handling it.
Usually just be quiet.
Okay.
Wait for the
But
feeling to pass.
that's not always the right response, but often it can be.
Okay.
But just think of it as an exercise.
Okay. Can I ask another practical question related to that? So I've heard your instruction in some of your recorded talks. I really like listening to those short talks. There was an instruction a while back about sort of getting into a state of concentration, I think first jhana maybe, where the way you described it was really beautiful. It was like your mind feels good, and so it becomes less defensive, and it says, yes, I do go for that. So is that where I need to be in order to see this? Or, I mean,
It helps a lot if you can find a place where the mind can settle down and feel secure.
and I guess try to slow down and see it.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'll work on that.
Okay.
Thank you.
There's a great column by Miss Manners about this woman who knows that her best friend is having an affair with her husband. And she writes to Miss Manners, she says, I don't want to get back at her, I just want my husband back. And so Miss Manners creates this elaborate scenario. The husband is claiming to be late at work and he can't get home in time, and actually he's over with the other woman. And so she tells the woman, okay, during those hours, plan some special activity for your children. Like putting on little plays and there's a little something that the children find entertaining. And meanwhile, without lying to the other friend, to the quote-unquote best friend, let her have this, tell her that you've found a new pleasure in life. Now her mind is going to go thinking, well, she's probably having an affair too. So the best friend, you count on the best friend to go tell the husband that she suspects you of having an affair. And meanwhile, when the father comes home, the kids come running to Dad. Oh, Dad, I wish you were here when we were doing this little play together. So the dad starts feeling guilty about not being with his kids. He realizes he can't trust this woman that he's having an affair with. And Miss Manners says, that's not going to last long. I kept thinking, boy, she sat down and strategized.
She must have worked really hard on her anger.
She worked on it, but Judith Martin, she's also a novelist, so she's used to thinking up things, But it's sometimes it's good just to sit down and think of this, what happened, what will I do in this scenario, what would be the best thing to do? And try to think outside the box, something you would never say or never do, but they say, well, maybe that might be the best thing to do.
It just seems like in order to be able to think that way, I need to not be angry.
Well, think that way before the anger comes. So that way you'll be prepared with another tool besides for anger. I mean, if you look in your toolbox and all you've got is anger, that's the tool you're going to use, right? So you're going to think up other tools.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like you have one online.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Can I talk?
Yep.
Hi, Ajahn Geoff. Thank you. Thank you. I am curious if you might be able to help me with it's a different way of thinking about this particular habit. Now, fortunately, it doesn't come up very often, but truthfulness and hiding behind the simplest of lies. I mean, it's embarrassing, but it does come up now and then, and you think, oh, this won't hurt. And there is this sense of hiding behind it, and I was just wondering if you might help me to think of that, to have different thoughts around that.
Well, what are you protecting yourself from?
That's it. Yeah.
And do you realize, okay, someday they're going to find out that you're making these little lies, and they're not going to trust you.
Yeah.
You're sacrificing the trust.
Right. Right.
So think about that, okay, you're losing this in order to gain what? A little bit of protection.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I know it's a childhood thing, that just has stuck around.
Yes, it
But
was already broken when I sat down on it, yes.
yes, right. Okay, all right. So just think about the negative karma associated with it.
Negative consequences. Okay, this person someday is going to find out about this and won't trust me.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All
And
right.
it's better to put up with a little bit of embarrassment or whatever.
Right, right. And like you said, use your imagination in the situation, I guess, too.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Hi, Ajahn, and kind of following up on Margaret's, because I encountered this recently, and so just a little bit of sharing. I have found too, there's that allure of the easy, quick half-truth. I can't join you for this walk because I'm busy, and I am busy kind of thing, but what I've discovered is that if I really challenge myself to be completely as honest, completely, thoroughly, what it's helped me see is the choices I have in front of me, and really help me to kind of prioritize and say, in this situation, this act of kindness that I want to do for a neighbor is going to cause me to what do I want to say, cancel getting together with someone else. And at first I was like, oh, that other person's going to be upset with me. But then I recognized in my heart of hearts, the act of kindness for the neighbor really is where my heart is. I really want to support this human. They're in a challenging situation. And I feel like if I'm just that honest up front with the other person, they might be hurt. Oh, she didn't make me a priority. But then I'm demonstrating my true values. And it's not that she's less than. It's just that in this situation, that act of kindness and support of the neighbor is a priority. And I guess
If
it doesn't.
I were you, I would soften the blow. Say, okay,
Right.
I do want to get together some other time.
Right,
Not
right.
now.
And then follow up with that. And I'm not saying it's a perfect answer, but what I've enjoyed in myself is it's helped me, it's caused me to have to sit more honestly with my use of time, my priorities, and sometimes my first reaction I don't like, but then I can sit back and take a pause, whether it's around responding to an invitation or changing a situation. But it's been a little scary, and I'm not doing it always so well, but it's feeling good, and I'm hoping this is skillful. Maybe I'm deluding myself, but it feels like I'm
There are
trying.
times when it's true. I don't have time. You don't have to be totally honest about your reasons all the time. But just the times when you feel that it would actually help the other person understand you, or help the other person realize what you're up to. Go ahead and be fully honest. I mean, one of the convenient things about being a monk is that you're always busy.
May I read it to you, because I can't seem to get it displayed. Thank you. Regarding the determination of discernment, can Ajahn speak about how it functions in the 16 steps of the Anapanasati? The Buddha's instructions are separated into in and out breath in each step. Why didn't he just say to simply be mindful of the breath? Is that related to the determination of discernment?
It's related to the fact that some people tend to be more mindful on the in-breath than they do on the out-breath. And so that he has to remind you, okay, all the way through the in-breath, all the way through the out. You're working on this. So I would say that it's kind of more of a matter of emphasis than anything else. That each time you breathe in, each time you breathe out, you're mindful, right now that I'm breathing out, this is what I want to do. Then now that I'm breathing in, this is what I want to do. So I would say it's more related to the determination on truth. I'm really going to stick with this every breath, in and out, in and out. But what comes to mind?
Ajahn, you speak on skillful desire for concentration versus bhavatanha, because I can, have the desire to if I were able to get into deep concentration, it would feel good and be spiritually significant, or longer term, it'd be really nice to be the kind of person who has reliable access to concentration. And I'm just not sure kind of the border between a skillful resolve on concentration and kind of fantasizing about being super meditator.
Well, again, if I'm going to get there, I have to focus on the causes. What are the causes? And the Buddha lists them in his instructions on right mindfulness. And then you ask yourself, okay, am I mindful enough? Am I able to keep this topic in mind? Am I alert to what I'm actually doing? And how ardent am I in doing this? And the question of ardency is always a question of what is the right effort I should be doing right now? How much effort should I be doing? Whether it's just a little bit or a lot, how much am I capable of doing? So there are lots of things you can adjust. So you look at the causes. The thing is, once you get the mind into concentration like that, there is the danger that you say, I'm going to abandon all my responsibilities and just be a super meditator. Is that too far away to think about? Or?
No.
No, okay. Okay, well, in a case like that, you have to remember that an important part of the practice is being a responsible person. If you have responsibilities, you hold up with them. Because if you can't hold up your responsibilities to your family and your friends, then you're not going to be able to stay responsible for the path. And think about people like Ajahn Mun. Everybody who went to see him said the first thing they were really struck with was how clean the forest was around where he stayed. And so he spent a lot of time keeping the place clean. Years back at the Barry Center, when I was still allowed to teach there, I gave a course on the forest tradition, and I said, okay, for everybody's homework tonight, go back and clean up your room. And then we can talk. Right behind you.
Thank you, Tanajan. I'd encountered information before that said that, for example, emotionally immature people or people that have certain personality disorders have an unstable sense of self. And I was wondering, would you be able to explain perhaps the difference between that and maybe someone who sees the impermanence and not self of the personality?
Well, the first thing you've got to do is develop a stable self. That's an important step in that direction. And that's going to be one of the topics for tomorrow afternoon, was the healthy sense of self on the path. I give you a preview, which is you have to have a sense that, one, you are competent to do this, you can do this. Two, you will benefit from doing this. And then three, you're able to observe yourself in such a way that you can actually give yourself good advice on what to do and what not to do. You can observe your past mistakes and learn how to talk to yourself in a way in which you can be honest and constructive in your criticism of what you've done. Those are the three big skills you have to develop. Because the whole thing about not self is, it's more of a value judgment than a metaphysical statement. We're not talking about how there is no self. The Buddha never said that. He never said there is a self, but he says we do create a sense of self. And then the question is, well, when is it worthwhile doing that, and when is it not? And when you do create a sense of self, which ways of doing that are skillful, and which ones are not? It's a kind of karma. And if you can see it as a value judgment, then there will be periods in the path when it is worthwhile to lay claim to your intentions and lay claim to your practice. And then there becomes a point where, okay, I've done that, I need to let it go in order to go beyond that. But first you have to train your sense of self. So tune in tomorrow. Same time, same station. Question here.
I was listening to your I was listening to several of your talks on clinging and craving, and clinging in and of itself is suffering, right? And so my question is, whenever there is clinging, there's always craving, right? They're together. And sometimes the clinging goes away, and maybe you're distracted or something. And does the craving also go away? And is it?
It comes and goes.
Comes and goes, okay.
What's interesting about the relationship is that there are places in the canon where the Buddha defines craving as desire and passion, and where he defines clinging as desire and passion. So the question is, how do they differ? And this is where you get into the other meanings of the terms. Tanha, craving, can also mean thirst. Upadana, clinging, can also mean the act of feeding. So it's this, you're thirsting for things that then you feed on. So the craving would be the thirst. And then as you're feeding, you're still thirsting, right?
Yeah.
But the fact that you've now latched onto something, you've made your happiness dependent on something that's totally unreliable, that's the suffering.
And then let's say, okay, I notice that I'm suffering, so there must be some clinging. So I say, okay, I can't see the craving because the concentration is not good enough or whatever. But then you can change the topic, right? Go for a run or a walk or something, and it helps, right?
Well, it helps make things go away for a while.
Yeah. So the whole point is to root it out completely.
One is to understand exactly what it is. And if your concentration is not strong enough, make it stronger.
So
In the meantime, before it gets strong, okay, then if you okay, I must be latching onto something. As if I can make myself think about something else. And there'll be part of the mind that says, no, this is more important. Okay, what is it? What is it?
yeah, there's this pressure to go back to the.
Yeah, well, you want to figure out, okay, that's where you're going to find the solution. Figure out where that pressure is coming from.
And to do that, you have to use the concentration, right?
One, and also you have to be determined, I'm not going to follow through with this.
Okay.
I'm going to let go. And something says, no, you can't let go. And you say, why? And it'll be quiet for a while because it's embarrassed. But then it'll come out.
Thank you.
There's a question up here.
Thank you, Ajahn. I have a question about discernment, and as you were talking, I was remembering I read Ajahn Lee's biography, which was quite thrilling in some ways. But there was a section that he went into a very long sort of imagining of getting married, and then this it was very detailed, and then all these things that happened, and just to sort of come to the conclusion that he didn't want to get married or disrobe.
Yeah.
And is that an example of discernment? And I guess I'm trying to understand more the process of discernment and what it looks like in how it manifests in different ways.
Okay, in that case, it was, he knew that one part of him was tempted to disrobe. There was another part of him that didn't want to disrobe. So he's going to do a battle. And so he said, okay, let's follow this fantasy for a while, see where it goes. And then he had the good sense to poison the fantasy. You know, this farmer's kid from the Northeast marrying the daughter of a nobleman in Bangkok. I mean, totally impossible. I'm trying to think what would be a good point of comparison here. I know some hillbilly hooking up with some Hollywood star. So at any rate, but then reality clicks in because she was delicately brought up. She can't work hard, and so when she has a child, she's too exhausted, and she ends up dying. And then he gets a wet nurse, and then the wet nurse is good with the kid for a while, so he marries the wet nurse. But then they have their own child, and then the new wife starts favoring her child against the other child. And it says every time I come home, it's this horrible mess. And that's called poisoning the fantasy. So it's an effective way of dealing with your fantasies.
So that's a different strategy than, I mean, it's using wise discernment, but it's also
Yeah, it's thinking strategically, yeah.
Okay, okay. I guess what brought it to mind was my nature is often to just make decisions quite quickly, just based on a feeling, and, not to bad effect often, but curious about asking the right questions and then pausing and thinking things through, pros and cons, and understanding.
And that's when you have to ask yourself, what do you really think will happen? As opposed to what you want to happen. One of my favorite scenes in his biography is when there's this woman who's been paralyzed for many years. And the word comes that, she's been told that a forest monk will come and be able to cure her. And so when he shows up in a nearby forest, the family goes out and invites him into the house. And so as he's coming into the house, I'm going to get chills when I tell this story. Coming into the house, she's already getting up and bowing to him, which she's hasn't been able to do for years. The first thing he has her do? He sits down next to her bed and has her light him a cigarette. And this is where you have Humphrey Bogart playing a John Lee, And then bit by bit, she recovers until she's able to walk like nothing's ever happened. And then he had to get out of there because people came from miles around with big jars. They wanted him to bless their holy water. So I think about that when I think, gee, if I only had psychic powers. And then I realize that I would have to be running away all the time. Hand over here.
Thank you, Ajahn. I wanted to follow up with Jessica's question. Not so much of anger, but when you dig down and you find out, it's about wanting to belong, or it's about a fear of losing somebody you love. Then what? What do you do next? Well, how do you work with that? How do you skillfully let go of that without being indifferent or?
You don't have to be indifferent, but you have to tell yourself, if our relationship really is solid, it should be able to survive this. We're talking about not losing them to death or something, but just splitting up, basically, over some issue.
I mean, I don't have anything particular in mind. I just think that I fall into that trap a lot too. I just I'm looking for tools to work deeper with that because it comes and goes. I'll usually what I do is go, oh, that's what it is, and then I go back to the body, and it disappears. But of course, it comes back.
It comes back when you have to ask yourself, which relationship in the world do you know of that's going to be permanent? They're all going to end at some point. And sometimes they seem to end, and sometimes then they come back again. And sometimes a friendship that has been through, weathered a period like that becomes a stronger friendship.
So, an arahant or an enlightened person, what does that look like?
Well, they realize they have karma with these people up to a certain point, and then beyond that, then that's the end of the relationship.
So that sounds indifferent to me, or
It's not indifferent, it's just a
or-
statement of fact. Realizing that, okay, I can live with that because I found something inside that's more valuable.
And so that's the difficult part for me. It feels cold for me. Because I'm so, there's so much distance between that, I don't know. It just,
Well, you try to maintain goodwill.
yes, and that's been very helpful, this whole, the meditation, this. I just wondered about baby steps that can keep me from vacillating between, this equanimity thing is difficult too, vacillating between, oh, it doesn't matter, to I really care a lot.
Well,
or
it's not
to,
that it doesn't matter, just that this is just a fact of life. This is the way things happen.
yeah, that's a difficult thing
Yeah.
because it feels cold.
Oh. Reality is harsh. But if you can,
And it just is.
and it just is, and this is where you have to say, I have to create something inside myself that I can depend on, so that I'm not clinging to these things and having to hold on to them, so that when the relationship is there, I can give to it what I can give, and when the relationship ends, okay, I've given my best, and I don't feel regrets.
Can I just segue off a little bit and talk about last night? And you were talking about, well, I don't know, but I had this huge craving. Sorry, I would just make a mess of it if I tried to tell you what you were talking about. But anyway, I had this huge craving for this strawberry ice cream. That was in my refrigerator while I was intently listening to you as well. But the cool thing, I don't know what you were talking about, but what I ended up doing was making that ice cream, breaking it down into heavy cream and sugar and a little salt, and I was like, yuck.
You forgot
so-
the fish scales. You forgot the fish scales.
Yeah, and the emulsifiers, yeah. And I ended up not eating that. I was like, wow. So those are the baby steps I'm looking for, the tools to help me. Because I don't know why that popped into my head when you were talking, but it did, and it helped me a lot.
Okay, well, there's this passage where the Buddha is talking to a woman who's just lost her child, and he asks her, before this child came into your life, were you okay? Could you survive? Yes. And where did this child come from? I don't know. And where has it gone? I don't know. That's the nature of samsara. And so when you're afraid of losing a relationship around yourself, before this relationship came, I was able to survive okay.
Oh, thank you.
there's been a kind of topic that I feel like we're circulating around and you've touched on a little bit. Ajahn Lee's language is very direct, sometimes almost violent sounding, and not in a negative way, but very, very to the point, and there's a fire quality to all of that, which I think has a lot of efficacy, and I think, you know, I myself have found a lot of fire in how I go up, and it's sometimes burned because it's not used very skillfully. And so having a more cooling approach to my practice is something I've tried to hold, and I feel I hear a lot in different Buddhist circles. In the US, it's a very kind of shanti, peace, peace, peace thing, and that's all fine, but maybe as direct or honest in what I'm facing as might be beneficial to me. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about holding that fortitude and that honesty and fire, as it were, in discernment and in our practice.
Yeah, well, it's a matter of recognizing how strong the problem is, how deeply entrenched it is, how much force you're going to have to use. And try to think of yourself as a person who has a wide variety of skills. That you're not just a fiery person or just a calm person. I'll tell you a story about Ajahn Suwat, a very gentle person. There was one time when, after he left the temple in the town of Ontario and came up to stay permanently at Waireta, apparently the income at the temple went down. And it was a time when there was a group called Dhamma had come into Los Angeles, which is kind of like a combination of the Nazi Party and Amway. Amway and the Nazi Party. But they were very heavy about proselytizing and pulling people in. And they had an official welcomer. And you arrive at the temple and they said, would you like to make merit? Here's some monks ready to retrieve your gifts. If you'd like to work in the office, here's the office. If you'd like to meditate, here's our meditation room. And sort of making people feel welcome. And so the temple in Ontario said, we need a welcomer. So they came up with a proposal and they brought it up to Ajahn Suwat, and he brought it up 3 times. I wasn't there for the first 2 times. And he would say no. And they come back and they tweak it a little bit, come back again. No. I happen to be there the 3rd time. And again. And he said, why do you keep making this proposal? And they said, because the temple income is down. He said, I don't care. What matters is, are the monks practicing properly, and the lay people practicing properly? That's all that matters. And the next day after the meal, and that was the end of the proposal. The next day after the meal, he turned to me and said, I don't like using strong language like that. And I kept thinking, if that had been John Fuang, he would burn their ears, you know. But then there was another time when there was a monk who had lived for a while with Ajahn Suwat, and at the end of the reigns there had been some accusations that he had been having affairs. And he had tried to step in and say, okay, we've got to have a Sangha meeting about this. And he was basically told, you stay out of this. And so he left. He left that monastery and ended up founding another one. And so when we founded about Metta, this monk, quote unquote, comes up with his followers to make a donation, and thinking that in front of all those lay people, Ajahn Suwat wouldn't mention this problem he had. And he bows down to him. And the first question to Ajahn Suwat is, when are you going to settle that, accusation against you? And the monk said, well, I've been trying. If you'd been really trying seriously, this would have been settled a long time ago. In my eyes, you're not a monk. Right in front of everybody. So he had the time, there were times when he could be forceful. Because you have to learn, okay, the best use of force is you keep it until you really need it. You don't go squandering it. I mean, living in Thailand under the last king was a good lesson, because he had a lot of, sort of, what's the word? the power of people's goodwill. But he actually stepped in very rarely and showed that he was blatantly using his power. And because as a result, people were okay with his using his power at those times. Because he knew how to keep it and brought it out only when necessary. So tell yourself, I got this fire weapon in here. But if I use it too much, it's just going to run out of fuel. Or else either that or it's going to burn my house down. So learn a range of ways of responding to situations.
Thank you.
Hand over here.
Thank you so much, Ajahn, for all your teachings. So I was thinking whether I could ask if you could elaborate a little bit more on your walking meditation instructions. So I find it hard to do sitting meditation at the end of the day. I try to, but because I feel drowsy, so I try to do walking meditation. But so far, what I have been doing is like focusing on the feet and also the breath. But today, I try to do, as you suggested, to focus on a stable place, like on the body. So I first tried brain, heart, and stomach. I finally found that thinking about the stomach is better, like imagining it as a bowl filled with oil, as you said. And I try to think about it after the walking meditation as well, and it's really helped. So I was wondering whether you have any more helpful instructions on walking meditation.
Okay, if you set out a meditation path, tell yourself when you reach the end of the path, you will always turn in the same direction. And each time you turn, stop for a second, make sure that your mindfulness is established at the spot you want it to go. And then you're trying to maintain it. I'm going to keep it all the way to the end of the path. And you stop, turn around, reestablish your intent. I'm going to maintain this all the way to the end of the path. And then that chops the time up into manageable lengths. See if that helps.
So you mean like it doesn't matter which part I focus on?
No. Whatever you find is the easiest to maintain a sense of balance and a sense of sort of kind of like it's almost like a still center in the movement of the body.
Thank you so much.
We have time for one more question before we break.
Thank you, Ajahn. I did wait to look around and see if anybody else had a question, but this is unrelated to my other question. It's a purely practical question about your breath meditation instruction. So for some time now, I have been sort of thinking or under the impression that my sort of favorite spot was kind of in my throat somewhere. And when I was listening to your instruction last night, I heard something that I maybe hadn't picked up before about breath energy really being independent of the actual air movement itself. And I started thinking, maybe what I'm focusing on here in my throat is actually the movement of air back there in the back of the throat. And maybe I'm not really working with energy in the way that would be most beneficial. So what would you suggest for how to maybe explore that and find well, I guess part one of the question is, does that sound reasonable to you?
It's possible, yeah, because you could be focusing on the movement here. One way of testing it is asking yourself, when the breath comes in, where is it coming from when it comes into that spot? And if you can think of it either coming right here rather than coming down the nose, but coming straight in here or straight in from the back, see what that does.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Because the energy body is really, really responsive to perceptions.
Thank you. I'll work with that.
Okay, let's break for about 15 minutes. We'll be back here at 2:45. Okay, as a way of explaining those 4 determinations, I'd like to talk about how they apply to the practice of the brahmaviharas. The Buddha does talk about universal goodwill as a form of mindfulness. In other words, it's something you have to keep in mind. And it's something you should be determined on. You have to make up your mind that you're going to do this. What this means, of course, is that universal goodwill is not innate. It's easy for us to feel goodwill for people we like and ill will for people who have harmed us. And these attitudes, universal attitudes, are called brahmaviharas for a reason. They're the attitudes of someone on the Brahma level, very high level of Deva. They're not called manusa vihara, which would be human dwellings, because human goodwill, as I said, tends to be partial. And so when you're applying the different forms of determination to these brahmaviharas, you start with discernment. And part of that means you realize that you're going to be training the citta, which in Pali can be translated both as heart and as mind. It's interesting that throughout the Buddhist world, the languages in which Buddhism is explained, they don't make a clear distinction that we do between heart and mind. The heart would be, of course, the side that wills and has desires. The mind is the more analytical side. And from the Buddhist point of view, all your desires have reasons. All your reasons are associated with desires. So you're training the whole thing all at once. So on the one hand, you have to want to will goodwill, universal goodwill. And you have to figure out what it means, how to foster it, how to get the heart to want it. Let's start with metta, which I'm translating as goodwill. It's not love or loving kindness. The word for love in Pali, bhema, which I've been told is not the same thing as bhema children. But it is something that the Buddha is quite critical of. He says that love tends to be partial. He says that love can form the basis for love, it can form the basis for hate. In other words, if there's somebody you love and other people treat that person well, you're going to love those people, regardless of what other qualities they might have. If they mistreat the people you love, then you're going to hate those people, despite whatever good qualities they may have. Similarly, if there's somebody you hate, if somebody treats that person well, you're going to hate that person too. Or if they mistreat the person you hate, you're going to love that person, which is not all that honorable an emotion, but it's very, very human, all too human, you might say. Metta is also not loving kindness. I gave the example last night of Ajahn Geoff and the snake. There was the snake chant in the Pali Canon, where a monk has been sitting under a tree, a snake falls out of the tree, bites him, and the monk dies. So the monks go to report this to the Buddha. The Buddha says it's obvious that he didn't suffuse the 4 great families of snakes with goodwill. Otherwise they wouldn't have bitten him. And then he teaches the monks a chant, in which you spread goodwill to all the 4 great families of snakes, and then to all beings with no feet, beings with 2 feet, 4 feet, many feet. It goes on and on that way. May they all meet with happiness, may all meet with well-being, and may they all go away. All the creepy things. And that's goodwill for them, in other words, realizing that sometimes we're better off going our separate ways. May you be happy finding your happiness, I be happy finding mine, but we will have to go our separate ways. I learned that chant. It was one of the first chants I had to learn when I was a monk. I went to stay with Ajahn Geoff. And I would report to him that I'd be doing walking meditation and find that there was a cobra lying right up next to my path. He said, yeah, we have lots of snakes around here, you have to be careful. And then every day, it was another snake incident. And to finally said, this is not normal. They're checking you out. Who is this strange Forlang? And so he recommended that I learn this chant spreading goodwill to snakes. And that was the end of the snake infestation. So they went their separate ways. You sometimes hear that metta means acceptance. When you say, I have goodwill for you, or I have metta for you, means I accept you. That's not the case. People need more than just acceptance. What it does mean, it means you have respect for that person's desire for happiness. And you also have respect for the principle of karma. And if you see that that person is trying to find happiness in the wrong way, from the point of view of karma, you'd be happy to help advise them, or just hope that they would see the error of their ways if you're not in a position to give advice. Like when you're trying to teach your parents. Parents tend to be very resistant to being taught by their children. So they just have to goodwill for them, hope that they would see the error of their ways if their ways have been erroneous. And so understanding goodwill in the light of karma involves two issues. One, what does it mean to wish for someone's happiness? And then two, what is involved in fabricating a state of goodwill? Because it is something you have to resolve on. It is a kind of mindfulness. It's not totally innate. You have to put it together. Let's talk about that first. First has to do with your motivation. This is how you talk to yourself. You're dealing with difficult people. I have to have goodwill even for these people. It's for my own good. Because if I don't have goodwill for them, I will probably have ill will for them, and then I'll start doing things that are not skillful, and that will become my own karma. So it's never a question of they're deserving your goodwill. Sometimes you hear, well, we're all one, so everybody deserves goodwill. We're not one. As Ajahn Geoff said, when I eat food, it goes into my stomach and doesn't go into your stomach. If we're really one in any meaningful way, we'd have a connected stomach. So it's not a question of anybody deserving goodwill. You need your goodwill for all beings as your own protection. And you want happiness that harms no one, and that's why you protect yourself. And you protect others. There's a statement where the Buddha says, when you observe the precepts, you're providing universal protection to all beings. In other words, they know that at least from your quarter, they don't have to fear any harm. And that way you get a portion of that universal protection as well. So this involves talking to yourself, which is, what I said earlier, is what the Buddha calls verbal fabrication. How you pose a topic in the mind and then you make comments on it. In this case, the topic is, why should I be spreading thoughts of metta, goodwill? And then the answer is, it's for your own good. But it also involves other forms of fabrication as well. The way you talk, the way you breathe can put you in a much better mood to have goodwill for others. If you're breathing in a labored way or a painful way, it's hard to feel, may all beings be happy. So you do what you can to breathe in a way that is comfortable and is easeful. The way you talk to yourself and the images you hold in mind. Talking to yourself can also involve that instruction the Buddha has about when people criticize you in harsh ways. He said there are 5 ways in which people criticize you. And sometimes they criticize you meaning well, sometimes they don't mean you well. Sometimes what they say is true, sometimes it's not true. Sometimes what they say is done with hatred, sometimes it's done with love. It goes down, and he says, this is normal human speech. So you think about that, okay, when people criticize you in a way that is false and is harsh and is ill-meaning. You tell yourself, this is not out of the ordinary. I wanted to be born in this human realm. I didn't look at the fine print before I came. I signed on without thinking. So this is what I'm going to meet up with. That's one way you can talk to yourself when you're dealing with difficult things. Another way of generating goodwill for difficult people, it has to do with perceptions. I mentioned some of them earlier. You perceive that your goodwill is like earth. The image they give in the canon is of a man coming along with a hoe and a bucket, and he says, I'm going to make this earth be without earth. And he digs here and digs there, and he spits here and spits there, and he urinates here and urinates there, saying, be without earth, be without earth. And you know he's never going to succeed because the earth is so much bigger. So if you can think of your goodwill as being that big, and of the efforts of other people to do horrible things to you, or people you love, or people you're concerned about, as being like that little man, it's a lot easier to maintain that goodwill. Similarly with someone who comes to the river Ganges with a torch and says, I'm going to burn up this river. They can't burn it up because the river is made of water. It's not like the Cuyahoga River. You have to be a certain age, I guess, to appreciate that one. And then finally, make your goodwill like space. People can try to write things in space, but it doesn't stick. So you think of their words as being, they're trying to write on your mind, but there's nothing in your mind that it can stick to. Just let it go. If you can keep these perceptions in mind, these are mental fabrications, then it's a lot easier to maintain goodwill. Finally, there's that image of the mother. You've probably heard it. I think it's in your chanting book, right? In the Karnanimeta Sutta. You probably know what page that is. 33. $36. Even as a mother protects with her life her child or only child, so the bond is heart. One should cherish all living beings. The word cherish is not in the Pali. Basically, you should protect your attitude of goodwill. In fact, cherish living beings is not in there. You protect your goodwill. And so that means two things. One is that you maintain your attitude of goodwill no matter what other people are doing. You want to make sure that your goodwill is independent of their actions. I've had a lot of people say, well, I know mothers who don't love their children or don't cherish their children. It's not the issue. Think about mothers back in India in those days. Social Security didn't exist. If you had one child, whether you loved the child or not, you were going to protect it. Because that was your hope for your own survival as you got old. And so think of that example that the Buddha gives of the bandits. They pinned you down and they're sawing you into pieces with a two-handled saw. I've always liked that detail, the two-handled saw. And he said, even in that case like that, you have to maintain your goodwill. So that's what the Buddha is talking about. Just as mother would protect her goodwill, her child with her life, you protect your goodwill with your life. You'd be willing to lose your life rather than lose your goodwill. That way you protect yourself and you protect others. So these are some ways in which you can help fabricate this attitude of goodwill through understanding the nature of karma, understanding the nature of how the mind states are created, based both on past karma and present karma. Then there's the other issue of understanding what happiness is. And when we say, may you be happy, is basically, may you act skillfully. Again, there's that line in the Karnanimeta Sutta that was in our readings. May all beings be happy at heart. May let no one deceive another or despise anyone anywhere, or through anger or resistance perception wish for another to suffer. So you're not just saying, may you be happy, but also, may you act skillfully and think skillfully. Because that's the way you're going to be happy. So those are some of the issues around discernment, or determination on discernment, in the practice of goodwill. Understanding what it means, what word metta means, understanding what you're talking about when you have to fabricate a state of goodwill in the mind, or how it's done, and then understand what it means to wish for the happiness of other beings. Okay, then the next determination, which is basically carrying through truth. You learn best what causes true happiness by giving rise to those causes in yourself. In other words, you want to act skillfully. If you're going to be helping other people behave skillfully, you have to know what that means, how it's done. So you follow the path. In this way, following the path is an act of goodwill and compassion. It enables you to know what leads to true happiness, so you can give good advice to others and set a good example to others. And you also carry through in the case of compassion and empathetic joy. Compassion basically is what metta, or goodwill, feels when you see somebody suffering. You don't say, hey, you got your just results finally, just desserts. You have compassion for the being. The Buddha says even if there's somebody whose behavior is thoroughly bad, you have to regard that person as you would regard a sick person lying by the side of the road in a desert. No matter, you don't know who this person is, you don't know anything about it, but you feel compassion. this person's in a miserable state. Empathetic joy is what goodwill feels when it sees somebody's happy. And in many ways, this is a test of the sincerity of your goodwill. Because here you have somebody who's enjoying the fruits of their past karma, good karma. They may be wealthy, they may be good looking, they may be powerful. And in some cases, they may be abusing those things. And you still have to have empathetic joy for them. May you continue in your happiness. You also have, if you have compassion for them, and say, may you stop doing these stupid things with your power and your whatnot. So as I said, it's a test of your sincerity of your metta. You wish for them to be happy, and this is what happiness looks like. It also teaches you samvega, realizing if the happiness ends just with material goods or social situations, it's very likely to be abused, and it's very likely to become a cause for unskillful behavior, which should get you spurred to say, I've got to find something better than that myself. Because if the happiness I end up with through this practice is just expressed in power and good looks and wealth, I'm in a position of danger. There was a forest Ajahn Wan, who gave a Dharma talk one time that stuck with me ever since I first heard it. He said, in Thailand, you probably know there are a lot of people who like to be generous, but they don't care about the precepts and they don't care about meditating. And Ajahn Wan said, people like that can expect to be reborn as a dog in an American house. But man ban frang. Men suk sabai. They live a comfortable life, like living. Comfortable life, but they don't know anything. If you are generous and you observe the precepts, okay, you're reborn as a human being and you'll be wealthy. But if you don't meditate, then you probably abuse that wealth and you'll probably suffer from abusing your wealth because you don't have the wisdom to use it rightly. If you want to be safe, you have to have generosity and virtue and meditation. That's when you're safe. So to get back to the determinations. The third one, relinquishment. Okay, you really do have to relinquish any ill will, harmfulness, or resentment. And you have to look for whatever lure there is in feelings. I'd like to see so-and-so suffer. Now sometimes that can get dressed up as like wanting to see justice done. That somebody's misbehaved and you just don't feel right that they're not being punished. And what you have to say in a case like that is, karma will work itself out on its own. You don't have to wish for it to work out. It's going to work out anyhow. In the meantime, what is gained by that person suffering? And we see some pretty blatant examples right now. People are suffering and are feeling, and they've been doing horrible things. They say, I'd like to see justice done. But how many people really learn from being punished for their wrongdoing? Many people get more and more entrenched in the sense that they were right. There's an article that I wrote a while back called Wisdom Over Justice. You might want to look at that. It talks about the story of Angulimala. That's a blatant case where justice was not done. But it was a case where the Buddha had goodwill for Angulimala. You could see that Angulimala did have the potential to not have to suffer. And so Angulimala gives up his murderous ways, becomes an arahant. And then he goes on his alms round, and you can imagine the people whose relatives were killed by him were just upset by the fact that here's Angulimala literally getting away with murder. He threw things at him, rocks and stones and broken pots and things. And one time Angulimala came back with his head broken open and his bowl broken. And the Buddha said, okay, it would have been a lot worse if you had to become an arahant. So there are cases where karma works itself out in a way that does not correspond with our ideas of justice. But there's no reason for us to insist that justice be done. If justice had been done in Angulimala's case, he wouldn't have been able to become an arahant. Finally, calm. You have to realize that not all people will act on the causes of happiness as you would like them to. Because you have to accept that. In this case, you have to develop equanimity. There are two kinds of equanimity. There's what John Foon would call small-hearted equanimity and big-hearted equanimity. Small-hearted is when you say, okay, I just have to put up with it and I accept it, that's the way things are. There's kind of a defeatist attitude, and there's a little bit of resentment with it. Large-hearted equanimity is when you're able to create the causes in yourself for true happiness, either through concentration or insight or both. And then you look at the rest of the world and you're no longer trying to feed off the world. And that way you can live with the bad things and the good things that are happening in the world and not get upset because you're not trying to feed off them. And if there's something you can do to help, you're happy to help because you're coming from a position of strength. But it's an equanimity that's not defeatist, because you've found the source of true happiness inside, coming from a position of strength. The Buddha talks about two kinds of equanimity. There's equanimity of the flesh and equanimity not of the flesh. Equanimity of the flesh is basically just making up your mind that whatever happens in terms of sight, sound, smell, taste, tactile sensations, I'm going to remain equanimous. And this, when the Buddha was giving introductory meditation instructions to Rahula, he starts out by saying, make your mind like earth. People pour garbage on the earth and the earth doesn't shrink away. Make your mind like water. People use water to wash the garbage, but the water doesn't complain. Make your mind like wind. Wind blows garbage around, but the wind doesn't get upset by the garbage. Make your mind like fire. Fire is used to burn garbage, but it's not disgusted. No, he's not saying just put up with whatever. He's basically saying, as a beginning instruction in meditation, learn how to be with things that are unpleasant so that you can understand them. Because that's the next step. He starts talking about the 16 steps of breath meditation, which are very proactive. You're intentionally breathing in certain ways, and you're intentionally trying to create certain mind states while you're focused on the breath. But what you need to do is learn when something is not going well, you have to be able to watch it and observe it and learn from it. That's the kind of equanimity he's talking about, and that's the skillful use of that. As for equanimity not of the flesh, that's the equanimity that comes from developing concentration. But you have to remember that even equanimity is a fabricated mind state. And so there's even higher calm of nibbana. In that case, you have the happiness of having found the deathless. And as the Buddha said, at that point, you understand feeding. You understand how the mind has been feeding off of things and it no longer has to feed. It's in a position of strength. So you're equanimous about all else because you're no longer feeding on the world, so you're not upset with the bad food, you're not excited about the good food, because you realize you don't have to feed anymore. That's the equanimity, which is a byproduct of the happiness of nibbana. Sometimes you hear that the goal of our practice is to be perfectly equanimous in all things. So remember, equanimity is a fabricated state. And the equanimity that the Buddha praised is the equanimity that comes as a result of finding the highest happiness. So it's not just telling yourself to be okay with whatever. I have a few notes on acceptance. Should we share those tomorrow, or should we plow through?
We have until 4 unless you'd like to cut early.
You can never tell how many questions we're going to get.
And then we have tea afterwards.
Yeah. Okay, let me talk about the 4 things that the Buddha said explicitly that you should accept, okay? And they're not many. We heard so many times when the Dharma gets what I call sound bitten. People turn it into sound bites. It's all about equanimity. It's all about acceptance. It's all about loving kindness. It's all about change. There's no one word that encompasses the Dharma, okay? And it turns out that with the word acceptance, doesn't occur that many times in the Pali Canon. It occurs, and the most frequent use of the word acceptance in Pali Canon is when the Buddha accepts an invitation. However, there are 4 other things that the Buddha explicitly says you have to learn how to accept. One is that you're born into this world, there's going to be pain. And you have to learn how to deal with the pain. Secondly, you have to realize that you're born into this world, there are going to be hurtful words. This is the nature of human speech. And the other two have to do with things that have already happened. One is, when someone has died, you have to accept the fact that they've died. There's a story in the commentaries about this king whose wife has died. He's so attached to her that he refuses to have the body cremated or buried. So you keep the body there in the palace. And the people of the palace, of course, don't like this. And so they find a monk who has psychic powers. They says, can you trace down where she has gone? It turns out she's been reborn as a worm. And so they get the monk to come with the worm to the palace. And then the monk, through his psychic powers, enables the worm to speak. And so he asks the worm, okay, are you happy as a worm? And the worm says, yes, I'm very happy. And do you miss the king? No, I don't miss the king because I've got this real hunk of a worm. That's when the king says, okay, bury the body. And then finally, the other thing that the Buddha has you accept is the fact that if you have made a mistake in the past, you harmed somebody, you have to accept the fact that you cannot go back and undo that harm. No matter how much remorse you feel over it, it's not going to go back and erase what you've done. The attitude you have to develop, and this is what I want to get into next, is that you don't just sit there and accept, but you learn how do I not suffer from the pain? How do I not suffer from the hurtful words? How do I not suffer from the loss of somebody I've loved? And how do I not suffer over the fact that I've made mistakes in the past? In each case, the Buddha gives some pretty explicit examples, except for pain. He doesn't talk about how to deal with pain. He just says you learn to endure, which I think is one of the big gaps in the Pali Canon. And for advice on how to deal with pain, you have to read the Forest Ajahns, or other modern teachers about their techniques for dealing with pain. I mentioned earlier this morning that Ajahn Mahabu's approach was to ask questions about the pain to get to some of your pre-verbal attitudes that you may have picked up. You dealt with pain before you could speak, and so you actually had pre-verbal strategies for dealing with it, which you may have carried into your adult life without realizing it, which is why you have to ask unusual questions about the intention of the pain and about the shape of the pain, about your fear of what to do to keep the pain from expanding. One thing I've found is that many times there'll be a pain, and there's this hardened shell of hardened breath energy around it, out of fear that it's going to spread. And many times that hardened shell is the worst problem. And you have to learn how to breathe through it to dissolve it. Dealing with hurtful words, as I said, on the one hand, the Buddha said, this is the nature of human speech. It's not all that unusual that hurtful words are being said. Sariputta has some good advice. He says, when someone says something hurtful to you, you tell yourself, an unpleasant sound has made contact at the ear. And it lasts only as long as the contact. Now, how many times have you thought that? Usually you pull it in and you mull it over and over and over and over again. And you have to realize, look at that, the suffering comes from the mulling it over. The contact came and it went and it's gone. And any suffering that you have from it is all now generated from inside. So that's what you have to deal with. And as for mistakes you made in the past, the Buddha says you realize that you can't go back and change it. The best thing you can do is to make up your mind that you're not going to repeat the mistake, and then you spread lots of goodwill for yourself, for the other person, and then for all beings. So these are ways of, when you accept something, it's not just saying, oh, I have to put up with it. You say, okay, how do I learn not to suffer from it? This is when the Buddha his teachings get really useful. As for what not to accept, the two things that he says explicitly are, you don't accept the existence of unskillful qualities in your mind. When greed, aversion, and illusion come in, you don't let them stay. Now you may let them stay for a while so you can study them. So, where is this coming from? What's the allure? But again, you're not just going to say, well, I'm just going to put up with the fact that that's as far as I've gotten in my practice so far, and I have to accept it. He said, no, I've got to do something better. Because the Buddha said, even more so when he was asked about, or he wasn't asked, but he volunteered some information about why he was able to get awakening. And one of the reasons was that he didn't accept the level of the skillful qualities in his mind. Skillful qualities. When he came to those states of concentration, it wasn't good enough. When he was able to put up with intense pain, it still wasn't good enough, because it hadn't gotten all the way. It was that impetus to say, I'm not going to just be okay or be content with my miserable concentration. I'll be content with my miserable whatever. If there's something wrong, something needs to be improved on, I'll improve on it. And even when it does get skillful, if I get good concentration, I'm not going to be content there either, because there's got to be more. So you don't just accept, you actually are discontent with your level of skill. Now that means you learn to appreciate it, you learn to realize that it has uses, but at the same time you realize there's more to be done. So when the Buddha's talking about contentment, he's talking about contentment with material things. If it's good enough, my food, clothing, and shelter are good enough for me to practice, that's good enough. And then you focus on trying to delight in developing and delight in abandoning unskillful qualities. Developing skillful qualities and abandoning unskillful ones. So that's that short talk on acceptance together with the brahmaviharas. Now, questions?
There's a quick question online about the book on pain that you recommended.
Mm-hmm. It's called Straight from the Heart by Ajahn Geoff. Also, there's a section on pain in the book, Good Heart, Good Mind, where I basically talk about Ajahn Lee and Ajahn Mahabu's approach. Okay.
Ajahn Geoff,
Yes.
may I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
Was it the Buddhist thought that really deeply learning to trust in awareness is what will help us at the time of death? Like the most,
You would have you say, try to get your mind in whatever best state you can. You get it. There's a concentration. And you're going to have to use your discernment to see where the mind is sending out little pseudopods for its next lifetime. So it's going to be quality of awareness plus your discernment.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, the important thing is to know that it can come at any time.
Right.
So, yeah. Okay, so the importance of awareness and discernment. Yeah.
It's interesting when the Buddha talks about focusing on the present moment, it's always in the context of depth mindfulness. It never talks about the present moment, its value in and of itself.
Right.
And so this is the time you've got to work on it, so you do it now.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you for the talk, Ajahn. I want to ask this question for all my peers. What kind of contemplation or reflection would you suggest for people who suffer stress at work, like overwhelmed with stress, overwhelmed work, and they are not able to concentrate anymore at work and not be able to be at peace?
Mm-hmm. Okay, one, I would say, when you come home from work, you've got to sit and meditate. Just sort of flush it out. And while you're at work, I had a student in Singapore one time who complained that while he was at work, he felt like he was a garbage can. And people kept throwing garbage into the can. And then when he came home after work, he had to dump it out. And so I said, make a hole in the bottom. In other words, just watch it go past. Whatever harshness there is in terms of your interpersonal relationships, to say, that's their issue, I'm not going to take it in. And then what you have left is the stress that comes with having deadlines. And then that's a matter of just learning how to develop good working habits. To figure out, my older brother was got his PhD in business administration. He could never understand why I became a monk. And the school where he went gave him a lot of work, and he realized it was more work than any human being could do. And so he said, okay, what they must, to figure out their reason for doing this may have been to figure out how good you are at prioritizing things. What work really needs to be done. and what can be let go. And also, I recommend reading David Graeber's book called Bullshit Jobs. It gives you a good perspective on work in America right now.
Hi. I have a question about pain in the body and working with that. For me, it's kind of the biggest point of my awareness is all the different like sensations of pain and that instruction on noticing the different qualities and aspects of it. You know, like when I first started meditating, it was kind of resisting and running away from it. And now it's more experiencing it more. But I also feel like I have this question of am I tensing myself more by noticing it more? And am I getting too stuck in my own contractions versus like widening out my awareness when I sit?
I mentioned the book Good Heart, Good Mind, and I was pointing out how Ajahn Lee's approach is, first of all, before you're going to go into the pain, trying to find some part of the body that you can make comfortable with the breath, so that you have sort of a source of strength inside. And when the pain gets really bad, so you have a place to go. That way you're more confident when you deal with the pain that you know that you've got a safe place to go. You're also coming from a mind that's been more nourished and refreshed. So you have the strength to deal with the pain when it comes and to start probing into it and to understand it. And again, don't just be with the pain. Ask yourself, what are the perceptions I have around the pain? There's a tendency of the mind to send little warnings to itself down the line. There's a pain down here, pain down here, pain down here, watch out, pain down here, pain down here. And many times that exacerbates the pain. It creates a more solid perception of the pain than there actually is. Did you ever read the novel Sirens of Titan? No. By Kurt Vonnegut. I keep referring to it when Dharma talks. But there's a passage in there where these people have been abducted to Mars. And they're trying to figure out why they were abducted and who's in charge of all this. And when they start figuring things out, the people who are in charge realize these people are figuring things out, so they erase their memory. And they learned that if they totally erase a person's memory, they become useless. So they would erase the major parts. And so these people who were constantly trying to figure things out realized, okay, they would have some part of their memory left. And so they would place a little note to self in there, go check this spot, and they would have written out a letter to themselves, explaining things. And so, but the mind does that. The mind states go, but before they go, they would leave a message for the next mind state, and the next mind state. And so we look into the extent to which your mind is sending messages. Watch out for the pain down in your hip, it's really going to hurt. And that way you solidify the pain. And see, if you catch yourself doing that, then you can stop. And then you find that the pain becomes a lot more erratic than it was before. It's much less of a constant burden, put it that way.
Yeah, it almost feels like there's like a reinforcing quality of noticing, like just becoming aware of it, then you like reassert it. And then when you reassert it, then you remember it, and then it's on and on.
So that's what you got to watch out for.
Yeah.
One thing I found useful was the perception that, one, it's not a constant pain, it's moments of pain. And when the moments appear, they are going away. Like you're sitting in the back of one of those old station wagons that had the seat facing back. And as you're driving down the road, as soon as something comes into your range of awareness, it's going away from you.
Yeah.
And that way you're much less the target.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Ajahn. Recollections were coming up for me in that there were two times in my life where I felt like the physical and emotional pain that I was in were beyond my range. And so I was going to ask you what then? It's like I felt like this is beyond what I can do. And what I took from the answer that you just gave now was, don't let it get to that point. You need to be, if a situation is arising that has the potential for something that you know may occur, like pain accompanied by claustrophobia or something, is you need to jump on it sooner? Would that be your...
Yeah.
Okay.
You've got to learn to, one, take it apart, and two, have your place of retreat.
Have
a place of retreat where you can get out of the pain.
Yeah, but doesn't that require a certain capacity for... I guess what I'm saying is when I feel like I was outside of my range, I just felt like I couldn't do anything. So maybe advice about that story. So that's a story, right?
That's a story. That's a really destructive story. I think I've told you the story of the woman who was one of John Fogel's students, and she was meditating one night, and this voice came to her and said, "You're going to die tonight." And she said, "Well, I might as well die meditating." So she continued meditating. And she said it was like a body, it was like a house on fire. That no matter which room you went into, you couldn't stay. She tried all the different parts of the body. And then she thought of space. Yeah, there's space around the body, space permeating the body. Go there. And she was able to get outside of the pain. So you have to remind yourself there is some aspect of your awareness that is outside of the pain. Go there.
Thank you, Ajahn.
That image of the pain going away, came to me when I was in Singapore one time. I was taken to a Chinese doctor who's going to treat my back. And he started rubbing oil in the back. At first it felt nice, but then it got harsher and harsher and harsher. The back was getting more and more raw and red. And then he pulled out these bamboo whisks and started up and down my back. And my first thought was, okay, what bad karma have I done? And then I realized, okay, here's a chance to figure out how not to suffer from the pain. And that perception came to me. And as soon as the whisk hit, the pain was going away. And that was when I able to stay with it. Say there's an online question.
Yeah, John. Thank you for another amazing opportunity to sit with you and for your teachings. Thank you very much. Yesterday, in answer to a question about someone who said they feel drained when they're in with a lot of people, you brought up energy bodies. I would like to learn more about how to protect yourself from negative energies. I was wondering if in any of your books you talk about energy bodies.
Well, mainly what I talk about is trying to make your awareness of the breath energy as steady as possible, and then filling your body with all that energy. And then when the body is full, then there's no place for the outside energies to come in. So first get a clear sense in some spot of the body that you got the energy of the breath steady. And then think of it spreading.
I tried doing that before work, but once I'm in the work environment, I kind of empty out again. I can't. And I don't have a place to go and concentrate.
Okay, well, you have to learn how to be centered in the midst of all that and maintain at least some sense of good energy in your body while you're working and while you're talking, so you don't get drained.
Any specific way of doing that?
Just visualize good energy. And that helps to create the good energy. As I said, the energy body is really responsive to your perceptions. To try to create that perception.
And is
And the
there
other
a
is when
reason?
people speak to you, tell yourself, okay, I've got this vacuum cleaner in my mind that likes to pick up the dirt. I got to turn it off.
Is
And
there
that
a
way it doesn't get
specific
affected.
reason why some people are more vulnerable to environmental energies, whereas not others aren't like that? Some people are more pick up more energies and others don't. Is there a karmic reason for that? Is
I
there?
think the comic reasons, yeah. That's all I can think of. I knew
And
one
is
woman in
this a
particular who was her energy was extremely porous. You could just walk past somebody and pick up their energy. And so
yeah,
she
and
really had to learn how to connect it.
that can be a gift,
Also, it can be a
and
curse.
it's also a curse. So is this good karma or bad karma?
It depends on how you use it.
Well, it can be of benefit to others because it also makes you really empathetic. You know how people are feeling when they're talking to you.
Yeah, but then at the same time, after you've been talking to them, you've got to clear out whatever they've been energy picked up from them. I know some people who give massages who have to stop for 5 minutes after every session to just clear out the energy they picked up.
Are these things helpful, incense and candles, or are we just making them up? Are they actually helpful in
Well, again,
cleansing that?
if you have good perceptions around those things, those perceptions will have an effect on your energy body.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
My teacher had a student who was quite psychic. One time she was visiting the monastery, and at the same time there was another guest at the monastery who was a friend of one of the cooks in the kitchen. And the cook had told us that this friend of hers had this problem. Every time she would start to meditate, she'd start shaking uncontrollably. And so while she was sitting with Ajahn Fuang, sure enough, she started shaking. And Ajahn Fuang mentioned to Pensi, the psychic woman, said, check her out, see what's going on. So she got into meditation. She saw these two beings behind her, shaking her like this. And so in her vision, she goes up and challenges them, why are you doing this to her? And they turn on her. It scared her so much that she went out and threw up. And so she went in to see Ajahn Fuang again. He said, you fool, you didn't protect yourself. One, in her case, she had an experience of light in her meditation. So he said, fill your body with light. If you don't have light, fill your body with good breath energy. And then lots of goodwill to whoever you're dealing with. And then you can talk to them. And so she did. And they explained that this woman that was shaking had been their child in a previous lifetime, and she killed them. And they were afraid that if she meditated, she'd get away without their getting back at her. And so she asked, is there anything she can do in order to end this karmic connection? They said, yeah, build a Buddha image for us. And we were building a Buddha image at the monastery at the time. So when Pensi went to see Ajahn Fuang, he said, you can't say anything to her because it sounds like we're using our psychic powers to get money. You can't do that. So you have to let her go. And it turned out a few years later, somebody else invited her to help make merit by building a Buddha image, and the shaking stopped. So one time I was in the Rocky Mountains up in Canada with another student who was quite psychic. I was telling him this story as we were climbing a glacier. And that night, he was in his tent, and he had this feeling that there was this huge being outside the tent sucking energy out of his feet. And so he got up, got into meditation, and did what I told him. Okay, fill your body with light, spread lots of goodwill. And then the goodwill came back to him. It was overwhelming. And so he just kind of bathed in goodwill for a while. And then there was another couple who were in a tent nearby. And so after the whole experience was over, he was you imagine how he was wired. And so he goes over to talk to him about this, and the wife hears him coming, and she thinks it's a bear. And so she wakes her husband. There's a bear, there's a bear. He says, no, it was Louis. Just wired up. And so he talked about it. And then he went back and it happened again. So the next day, he just didn't want to talk to human beings. He was just off on his own for that whole next day. So, but it's a good lesson to know. Fill your body with good energy and spread goodwill. Anything else? Great.
Over tea yesterday, I was sharing a story about being with a difficult person, and my way of maintaining my boundaries was sort of a feeling of not going out to feed on them. And now we're talking about sort of keeping things from penetrating as a way of sort of maintaining boundaries against difficult things. Are those two complementary things or different perceptions of the same thing?
They're two complementary activities. One is you're trying to feed off somebody, then you're opening yourself up. And if you're projecting good energy, again, that's kind of pushing against their energy, so it can't come in. So instead of making an opening for their energy to come in, you're closing that opening and then spreading something good in their direction.
Thank you.
That it? Okay. Okay.
I guess following on this theme, I have a couple of questions. Because when you say spread good energy, it almost feels like I'm having a hard time feeling inside. Like if that almost feels like what I would feel like when I'm pushing negative energy out. It's like, that feeling of like, how do I access, if I'm trying to make a boundary and I'm already feeling activated, how do I access the good energy to spread?
Again, that's why when you don't feel any good energy in your site, you say, okay, close up, don't accept anything from outside. But if you do feel good energy inside, think of it, you don't push it, you just radiate it. Let it radiate on its own.
So it's less of a doing and more of a being?
More of an allowing.
Allowing.
Yeah. I mean, you do have to create that sense of good energy someplace inside you. And then just think, right, it's like the sun, it's just going to radiate on its own. The sun doesn't have to push the light out.
So is that the practice that we are building that good energy so that when we need it, in those times we have access to it?
Yeah. Okay. It's not just enjoying it, it's also saying, I'm going to need this at times.
This is a useful tool.
Right.
Okay, and then I have a little bit of a follow-up with, in my meditation, ill will is something I deal with quite a bit. And when I was meditating, ill will came up again, and I was thinking about what you said about using gratitude and generosity as a tool. And so I kind of turned towards the goodwill and looking for ways that I could use generosity towards it. And I was thinking of, and gratitude of like, my goodwill has been very loyal. It's been around a really long time. And it has certainly showed me that...
I actually put it in your other car, too.
The wonders of Zoom, yes.
The ill will has certainly showed me that how to access energy and sort of focus, because that's what it causes energy to rise and it causes focus, although it ends up being for something usually unskillful. So I'm wondering, is taking lessons from the ill will, and is that like kind of making friends with what is an enemy, or is that useful?
I would say, there's the energy of a kind of focus which really just is negative regardless. And it's there because goodwill is more like a all-directional energy. That's the kind of energy one. When Ajahn Geoff was sick, we had a monk who had some energy talents. And so when he was looking after Ajahn Geoff, he tried to send some good energy into Ajahn Geoff, and Ajahn Geoff's energy repelled it. It came back to the monk, the monk got sick. You have to be sort of more universal, all directions. The image they give in the canon is of a trumpet blower who blows the trumpet, and the sound goes in all directions. without being focused on any one particular spot.
So are you almost saying like focus is actually, when I think about focus, I think of like almost like one pointedness,
Right.
but you're saying something very different. You're saying focus is actually
Broad.
it's broad.
Yeah. If you've ever read any books about what they call scatter vision, when you're going through the forest, say you're looking for mushrooms, you have to have, your vision has to be such that it's giving equal weight to every part of your visual field. That's what you're looking for. That's why I give the image of every cell in your body, breathing in, breathing out.
And so do skillful qualities have more the tendency for that, and unskillful has more the tendency for that one?
Well, you can. I mean, I know some people who really can get their skillful qualities very focused, but this is sort of more general, all directional. It creates a better environment all around. This is the time of day for stories. Ajahn Fuang had a student she came to meditation late in life, but she was very, very talented. And both in sort of psychic stuff happening and also in her ways, her ability to explain things that she had learned in her meditation. One of my favorite stories was she got so she could check up on what people were doing in different places. And she had a daughter who she had worked really hard to get to study in America. So she decided to check up on the daughter one afternoon. And she had this vision of the daughter sleeping. And so in the vision, she said, "Why are you sleeping? I sent you over there to study, not to sleep." And in the vision, the girl says, "Mom, it's nighttime over here." Now, the old woman had a 4th grade education, and she went, "What do you mean nighttime? Daytime is daytime, and nighttime is nighttime." And then she found out, of course, later that that's not the case. But there was this group of people who were inspired by her, so they would practice meditation with Ajahn Fuang when he was in Bangkok, and then they would go study with her at Wanasoka when he was not there. And they started coming to all sorts of conclusions about her level of attainment, their levels of attainment. And so they decided she must be a non-returner, and the ringleader of the group was a once-returner, and some of the other members were stream-emitters, and it was getting kind of out of hand. And one time they went to see her, and she started yelling at them in really foul language. And I said, "What's happened to her? What's going on?" And then they realized she was possessed. Possessed. So they went to get the vice abbot of the monastery, who had a reputation for chasing out spirits. And he comes in, and the spirit says, "I saw you break this, and this precept last week. I'm not afraid of you." And so no matter what he did with he had this steely-eyed gaze. With a steely-eyed gaze, there was no match for the spirit. And so he and the ringleader of the group, his name was Bunlard, were trying to figure out ways of getting the spirit out, and he just kept laughing at them. This went on for a couple of days. And so finally Ajahn Fuang came into Bangkok, so Bunlard went to see him. And they had this plan. I love the details of the plan. There's a large sculpted Buddha head in Wanasokaram. It's called Lumpha Sian, which means basically Lumpha head. And there's a long story behind that. But it has a yaksha residing in the head. And you can contact the yaksha on Wednesday nights. They have this theory in Thailand of what they call the powers of the days in Kamlangwan. And Wednesday night is a powerful time. So you contact him, he'll help chase spirits out. So this is Wednesday morning. And they go, Bunlard goes to see Ajahn Fuang and says, "You got to come out and see Yom Tam. Something's happened to her. She's been possessed by the spirit. We can't get out." And his plan was that Ajahn Fuang would say, "Oh yeah, it's a really tough spirit. Anybody can get her out. It's hot stuff." And so Ajahn Fuang goes in. He told me the story that he goes into her room, and she's lying with her back to the room. He said, "Okay, what's going on? How are you doing?" And they said, "Okay, if you don't want to talk, I'll just sit here and spread goodwill." So he sat there, radiated goodwill for 1 minute. What? Where am I? What's happened? The spirit was gone. So that radiated power has some power. There's a question back there.
Thank you. I'm here a little bit of elaboration on discerning, and maybe this comes up organically, but exercising the brahmaviharas internally as it relates to myself, and exercising them in a more outward fashion. And they both are clearly quite relevant. There's not one without the other to some degree. And they're necessary for our practice, our sitting practice.
Right. Inside, you can start with your breath. You want your breath to be comfortable. You want it to be a good place to settle down. That's goodwill for yourself. You see where there are pains in the body, where there's blockages in the body, you work through them. It's compassion. Where the breath is comfortable, you try to maintain that. Empathetic joy. And if there are parts of the body that you can't treat with the breath, okay, it's time for equanimity for those parts right now. Like when I was first starting out, I found out that I had this really hardened area around my heart. And no matter how much I tried to get good breath energy in there, it just wouldn't go. And the more I tried to force it, the more it would repel. So I figured, okay, I just got to be very gentle around it. And basically get so that it would trust me. Then finally one day it was like this ice, something broke. And it all opened up. So that's how you exercise the brahmaviharas inside. One way of exercising them inside. And then when you learn to be more gentle and understanding with yourself this way, it's a lot easier with other people. Especially if you have this source of independent happiness inside, you realize, okay, my happiness does not have to depend on these people, so I'm not feeding off of them. That's a lot easier with goodwill.
Thank you.
To complete the story, John Freud said the Spirit had come with a message, which was that if Yom Tam was not if a spirit could get into Yom Tam, she was not a non-returner. And if she was not a non-returner, what are you guys? Bunlur didn't talk to him for a year after that.
I guess I have a question. I've been struggling a little lately with kind of feeling disgusted. And that's not a common feeling for me. I feel like, I had difficulties with people, and then with a friend of mine, and I don't know, I just feel sort of, I don't know if it's jaded about people, but I kind of wonder how to deal with those feelings, what the antidote is.
The antidote is compassion, starting with yourself. And then whatever part of you says, I can't take this anymore, I'm sick and tired of this. Tell yourself, okay, how many aeons have you been doing this? It's been a long time. When you've been able to keep coming back. And there must be some, there's generally a sense of that you're running out of energy, which is why you feel like I can't deal with this anymore. Which is maybe maybe some time to go into seclusion for a while and just recharge your batteries.
That's sort of what I had in mind. Appreciate that insight. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, to be continued tomorrow.